Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June meeting of the MTA Board. I want to welcome the public and my fellow colleagues, including new colleagues on the board. I want to start today with some brief opening remarks, and then we'll turn the floor over to our public speakers. I want to talk first about World Pride Day. New York City is hosting World Pride for the first time with events all month and significant events, the march on Sunday. This weekend's particularly... Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June meeting of the MTA Board. We good? This weekend is particularly significant. I'm hoping to say this once.
Say this once. Say this once.
Marking both the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising and with World Pride culminating with the Pride March on Sunday. Millions of people are expected. The MTA wants to do everything we can to accommodate the millions of people coming to celebrate this historic event. At the MTA, we've been celebrating in many ways throughout our system, including for the first time designing a Pride-specific logo, decorating our trains. You may have seen the logos on the trains. Developing custom Metro cards. Here they are. They're collector's item. Get them soon. And producing new merchandise for the Transit Museum. 14th Street, the Village, and Chelsea will be particularly busy, so we're pleased to announce that we'll be running regular weekend L service through both tunnels for the entire weekend. During the busiest times, we'll be running an L train every 4 minutes instead of every 20. I should note that the ability to do something like this for a special historic occasion would simply not be possible under a full shutdown, and is yet another huge benefit of the new L project approach. It also wouldn't be possible if the project weren't a month ahead of schedule, thanks to the leadership of Jano Lieber and his team. We're ready for increased ridership with additional service on other subway lines near the parade route. There'll be extra personnel at key stations along the route and additional bus dispatchers to help with changing traffic conditions. We're also coordinating, as we do on special events, very closely with the city and with the NYPD in particular. We've created a special web page, new.mta.info/Pride 2019, where we'll post more details about the service we're adding, along with any service changes, such as detours some buses will make due to street closures. We recommend customers check the website before they head out to Pride-related events this weekend. Second, I want to talk about some important legislative events in Albany. As you may know, this year's legislative session concluded last week and included some key changes for the MTA. These are in addition to Central Business District tolling, which was enacted in April, a historic achievement. We scored a major victory for our bus network and our bus customers with the expansion of bus lane camera enforcement, which allows the MTA and New York City DOT to use cameras to enforce bus lanes 24/7 and lifts the cap on the number of corridors that can be enforced. Importantly, it also lowers the first fine from $115 to $50, easing the burden on drivers who may have entered the bus lane accidentally. That's an important social justice amendment, social equity amendment that was made. We're grateful to former MTA Commissioner and current DOT Commissioner Polly Trottenberg for her partnership and support on this initiative and in supporting this bill, to Assembly Chair Nili Razik and Senator Liz Krueger for sponsoring the bill, and to the members in both houses who supported it, including Speaker Carl Hastie and Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Bless you. Another bill that passed was a small legislative change, but one that represents a big win for New York City subway riders. This bill authorizes the city to alienate a small parcel of parkland in Soho so we can install an electric power substation underground below a basketball court. The substation will provide additional power to support CBTC, communication-based train control, on the 8th Avenue line, ultimately allowing us to run more trains per hour and serve far more customers. And after the construction is complete, the courts will be completely restored. On this, we owe thanks to Chair Deborah Glick and Senator Brian Cavanaugh, who represent the area, for their sponsorship and support. Thirdly, the MTA Small Business Mentoring Program, a national model that provides training, access to capital, bonding assistance, and contracting opportunities for New York State certified MWBEs, has also been extended for 10 years through 2029. Thanks to Chair Charles Fall in the Assembly and Senator Leroy Conray for support on this bill. Finally, the omnibus bill included additional provisions for the draft personnel and reorganization report due by June 30th, which we're actively working on. The board will approve a draft report by July 30th, and the MTA will appoint a chief transformation officer to implement the report's recommendations. The draft report is only the beginning. There will remain a financial advisory review, the results of which will be incorporated into a revised organization plan by this fall. And there's also a forensic audit that will be done and completed by the end of the calendar year. Let me talk briefly about the financial plan. In the meantime, we've also been getting ready for the July financial plan. When our CFO, Bob Foran, last reported out the financial plan in February, the MTA was projected to face operating deficit in the range of $1 billion in 2022. Since then, we've implemented aggressive cost reduction efforts, including first, setting ambitious and mandatory savings targets totaling $500 million for all MTA agencies. That's $350 million of operating expense and $150 million on the capital side. Secondly, establishing a vacancy control committee to keep a close focus. This was done by Acting Chair Freddie Ferrer when he was here, to keep a close focus on hiring of non-represented, non-operational employees. Third, pursuing a 10% reduction of professional, technical, and advisory service contracts. Fourth, continuing our cost containment task force efforts to revamp and streamline the congestion process led by Chief Development Officer Jano Lieber. These efforts, in addition to past savings initiative led by Bob's team since 2010, aggregate more than $2.5 billion in annual recurring savings when fully implemented. That helps our out-year forecast, but it's not enough. And while Central Business District tolling was an extraordinary development for the MTA in our region, those revenues are lockbox for capital expenses only and cannot by law support operating expenses where significant deficits for the MTA remain. As you know, state law requires us to break even each year. Without the implementation of dramatic, expedited changes to the agency's business model, which will be outlined in the draft MTA transformation report done by Alex Partners, we'll be forced to resort to painful measures in order to balance our budget, including possible service cuts, additional fare and toll increases above the existing scheduled increases, and as a last resort, reductions in force. As always, we will do everything we can to avoid service cuts. In the meantime, we're continuing to keep a close watch on daily operations and management, including our ongoing review of overtime usage and continuing to implement and shift the agency towards one modern biometric timekeeping system. Let me talk about outgoing members of the MTA Board, who I want to acknowledge and thanks for their service. Freddie Ferrer acted as vice chairman from 2011 to November 2018, and as vice chairman, and repeatedly agreed to serve as acting chair, which he did a historic 3 times. Freddie led the agency through challenging times with a clear and strategic vision, and we're all better for his insights, perspective, and guidance during his years here. Commissioner Polly Trottenberg served on this board for 5 years and provided invaluable and irreplaceable judgment, advice, and perspective as New York City's DOT commissioner. She and her agency have been tremendous partners on many priority projects, most recently Central Business District tolling and bus lane enforcement. And she will be missed on the board, although we will continue to work with her closely in her day job as DOT commissioner. And Michael Linton brought to the board private and high-tech sector experience and expertise. Now, I'd like to welcome and introduce 3 new recently approved MTA board members, some of whom joined us on Monday. Linda Lacewell is the superintendent of New York State's Department of Financial Services. She previously served as chief of staff and counselor to Governor Cuomo. She's also a former prosecutor and New York State's first chief risk officer. Robert Lynn is the former director and commissioner of New York City's Office of Labor Relations. He previously served as chief labor negotiator under Mayor Ed Koch. Robert Mujica is the budget director for the state of New York. He previously served as chief of staff to the temporary president and majority leader of the Senate, and concurrently served as secretary to the Senate Finance Committee. I also note the reappointments of Andrew Albert and Randy Glucksman, and thank both of you for your continued time and service. As I said at our April board meeting, with the exception of the chair and CEO, board members are unpaid citizen volunteers who serve without compensation. Thank you all for volunteering your time and energy to serve the people of New York. And now, if new board members would like to make introductory comments, I'd welcome them.
Thank you, Pat. I just wanted to clarify that I participate in the board in my personal capacity and not as the superintendent of DFS. But I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Let me just say that I'm also delighted to be here. I think there's no more important set of issues before longtime New Yorkers than transit and the issues involved with the transit systems that we have in place. So I'm really very excited to be part of this opportunity, and thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you, Bob. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Lucille Songhai to introduce today's public speakers. Lucille.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 17 members of the public registered to speak today. But before we begin our public comment period, I want to remind everyone that your safety is our first priority, and therefore we ask you to follow the following procedures. In the event of an emergency, 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell E down the hall past the elevators. In case of an emergency, notify emergency personnel for assistance. An automated external defibrillator for use by trained personnel is in the main hall just past the elevators. Now, for our public speakers, whom I would like to remind that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware of the clock in front of the room and the warning light you will see reminding you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. The first speaker we have today is Jesse Sandberg, followed by Joanna Klimko.
Good morning. My name is Jesse Sandberg. I worked for the MTA for 28 years until I retired in 2016. Since then, I've been working with a private sector technology company as Director of Shared Services. You might not know this, but the MTA's Business Service Center is the most comprehensive, well-managed, and respected shared service organization in the public sector in the United States. Nobody even comes close. I raise this in the context of MTA's plan for reorganization of agencies and key functions due out at the end of June. Excuse me. The BSC offers a roadmap to a successful transformation process. In 18 months, the MTA retired hundreds of pieces of software and replaced it with a system for HR and finance, trained over 5,000 users, lifted and shifted 400 people, negotiated with unions, and saved money. That's something even the private sector would admire. The process included creating a team of MTA and outside experts, building consensus when possible, but otherwise moving forward with the plan agreed to by the board and senior management. The role of shared services is to transform those functions that are common across the organizations. Functions in the legislative 10-point plan, construction management, legal, engineering, procurement, HR, advertising, are all candidates for consolidation, but careful consideration should be paid to particular areas that are mission critical and should remain with an agency. During a time of sweeping change, organizations need to be mindful not to sacrifice innovation and end up losing their mojo.
Please kindly conclude your remarks.
I applaud your mandate for change. Please be thoughtful and planful in the execution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joanna Klimko, followed by Rachel Faust.
Hello, my name is actually Johanna Klemenko. I'm a private citizen, and I'm also representing Sydney, Center for the Independence of Disabled in New York. I wear a lot of hats. Essentially, I'm a mind-body psychotherapist and a dance movement therapist. I'm a social worker with a specialty working with people with disabilities. I run a training institute, And I spend the rest of my time doing rehabilitation so that I can remain as functional as possible and diminish my pain as much as possible so that I can accomplish all the things that I do. The thing that makes it possible for me to do all of these things is being a member of the pilot program of the Accessoride on-demand e-hail program. If for those of you who are not familiar with the history of the pilot program, it was introduced 2 years ago as a model for the way that Accessoride should be run in its entirety. It was supposed to be the beginning of transferring 99% of all Accessoride rides to taxis. What's happened is quite the opposite. The program has been capped at 1,200 people, and there are people clamoring to get out of regular Accessoride, which is so demeaning and so incredibly expensive for the city and the state. It's my plea is that the issue of expanding the pilot program really be reopened, and that all of the people who are on the waiting list to get into the pilot program be admitted. The taxi industry is also dependent on this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our following speaker is Rachel Faust, followed by Maxwell Reinisch.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for state authorities like the MTA. reInvent Albany and 5 other groups, including the New York City Transit Riders Council, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, Transit Center, and Riders Alliance, issued a statement this morning raising a number of areas of concern regarding the MTA's fiscal health and welfare, which we believe the MTA Board, Governor, and Legislature must consider. Number 1, Governor Cuomo must deliver the remaining $7.3 billion in direct state payments budgeted for the 2015 to 2019 capital plan. 2, rolling over current capital projects to the 2020-24 capital plan, as suggested by Board Member Schwartz yesterday at the Finance Committee, amounts to a reduction in size or cut to the current capital plan. And if this is being seriously considered, this should be done through a regular amendment process. 3, the MTA has already dangerous levels of debt and will be paying more than 3 times recommended levels by 2021, when debt will equal 19% of the operating budget. 4, MTA reorganization should be transparent, and the public should have time to review and comment. Our groups have previously called upon Chairman Foy and the governor and legislative leaders to ensure plans are released as soon as possible for public input. And 5, the MTA's Federal Transit Asset Management Plan and 20-year needs assessment should be public documents and used to determine how much the 2020 to 2024 capital plan will spend on achieving a state of good repair. Beyond these issues, reInvent Albany is concerned there have been steps backward for accountability and contrary to needed reforms that would clarify the chain of command, accountability, and transparency. This year's Big Ugly Bill included 2 changes to MTA management and governance that we believe lessen accountability. 1, making the state budget director ex officio, despite concerns about meeting the fiduciary duty to the MTA. And 2, the MTA board hiring a director of transformation when all other staff positions are hired by the governor or CEO. Given these concerns, the MTA board should clarify the powers and responsibilities of the Director of Transformation as soon as possible and require this person make regular public reports about their activities and plans. And again, reorganization plans must be made public as soon as possible. And the same transparency should apply to the capital planning process, including release of the federal TAM plan and the 20-year needs assessment.
Please conclude your
Thank you.
remarks. Thank you. Our next speaker is Maxwell Reinisch, followed by Rick Horan.
Hello, I'm Maxwell Reinisch. Good morning, members of the MTA Board. There have been many discussions and open houses over the last few months about the upcoming bus network redesign, and there is one aspect about that I would like to specifically address, being the Select Bus Service program. Ever since its inception in 2008 on the BX12 line, the program has been expanded to 18 routes across all 5 boroughs. It's an amazing program that has sped up bus times across every route it was implemented on. Because of this upcoming redesign, the MTA has said that they will stop all future Select Bus Service plans outside Manhattan until 2021. I understand that decision and and respect it, but I would advise the board to consider making one more route into a select bus service line, which is the proposed M125 line, which would replace the BX15 line in Manhattan from the Bronx Bus Network redesign. In the proposed redesign, you would split the BX15 into two separate routes. The BX15 would run from Fordham Plaza with connections to Metro North to the hub at 149th Street and 3rd Avenue with connections to the 2 and 5 trains. While a new route called the M125 would run from the hub to 125th Street and Riverside Drive, which would replace the BX15 in Manhattan. I would like to propose that this M125 route be added into the select bus service program as well. The 125th Street is one of the most congested corridors in the city in terms of traffic time. I rode the current BX15 route across 125th Street and timed it, which it took me about 30 minutes to do. I believe the select bus service program would make the time, that 30-minute time, go down even more. The good news is that most of 125th Street already is served by select bus service thanks to the M60. Adding a few more stops to compensate for this M125 route would be less costly because of it. In conclusion, while I like the idea of splitting the current BX15 route into a shorter BX15 and a new M125 route, that M125 route should have select bus service. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rick Horan, followed by Mary Parison Lavelle.
I'm Rick Horan, Executive Director of Queens Rail. Our mission is to see that the Rockaway Beach branch is integrated as a fully integrated part of the subway system. And as you know, there's a study going on. It was commissioned in 2016 by CEO and Chairman Tom Prendergast. The line was to be evaluated that runs 3.5 miles from Ozone Park to Rego Park. And it was to reconnect South Queens with the rest of the borough and the rest of the city. The promised delivery date of that study was June 30th, 2017. At that time, instead of releasing the study, the MTA said that it was going to be expanding the scope to include a JFK Airport one-seat ride to Midtown. That's a significant departure from the original intent of the study. However, we feel that both the needs of residents and visitors to the city can be serviced. We're now a year beyond the new deadline, and not only don't we have the study, we don't even have any reason from the MTA as to why this study is delayed. New York City needs this rail. We need it to take cars off the road. Woodhaven Boulevard and Van Wyck Expressway are packed. This railroad will make a connection that will give people a viable option. It will half the time from Howard Beach to Midtown and take about 45 minutes off of the commute between Rockaway and Midtown. We do have South Manhattan connections with the A train and the ferry, but there is no connection between South Queens and JFK Airport and Midtown Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mary Parison Lavelle, followed by Jason Pinero.
Good morning. My name is Mary Parison Lavelle, and I'm the chair of Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. Chairman Foy, in 2013, the Long Island Railroad conducted a rigged capital procurement, and we caught them doing so. In 2016, the MTA promised state elected officials that you would buy the most technologically advanced and cleanest switcher locomotives through a real and fair procurement. Then your staff rigged another capital procurement in 2018 with STV's Mark Sullivan, who is Long Island Railroad's retired chief mechanical officer. This actually last month, you and board member John Samuelson both agreed on that it's an appropriate thing for the MTA Inspector General to investigate Long Island Railroad's management corruption in procurement and contracting. This investigation must yield the names of the Long Island Railroad staff that did this. Why do they feel that they can act this way? And why do we see these managers repeatedly doing this? The heads of the managers who rigged the 2013 and current procurements, their heads should roll. The heads of the managers who sold 4 locomotives illegally for less than scrap value in 2014 and 2017, their heads should roll. The heads of the Long Island managers who set up the 2018 $30 million sole source procurement for OEM parts from Caterpillar Progress Rail, who, by the way, is the preferred vendor of this locomotive procurement, their heads should roll. When are you going to hold your managers accountable for waste, fraud, and abuse? Our communities and railroad workers are being harmed by needless excess pollution because you're allowing corrupt and incompetent managers to conduct fake capital procurements.
Please conclude your remarks.
And make sweetheart contracts for preferred vendors. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jason Pinero, followed by Bradley Brashears.
Good morning on the Wednesday after my 33rd birthday. I'm gonna start off, since that is Pride Month, why not we have a more diverse MTA board? The youngest board member that I know is Veronica Vanderpool. I could be 33 years old, and I could be sitting there with you guys, giving you good ideas, new ideas. But instead, we have people that could be even my grandfather. That's a shame. And Pat Foy, you know that right now, as we speak, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority is losing approximately $260 million in cost of fare evasion. What are you going to do about it? And please consider the Atlanta ticket that provides service from my home station, Atlanta Terminal Brooklyn, to 10 other stations in Southeast Queens. Make it permanent, and consider alternative on the Metro North end. And please, I consider to every single board member to support Andy Byford's Fast Forward plan. It's a necessary plan that could make our subway system in the 21st century. And last but not least, no more fare and toll increases. We found out yesterday that the Port Authority, that Pat Foy was chairman back in the day, they're gonna raise their tolls and their fares. So I request that the MTA freezes the fare and toll increases until we get our system up to date. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bradley Brashears, followed by Colin Wright.
Good morning, board members. My name is Bradley Brashears, and I'm the planning manager at the PCAC, speaking on behalf of the New York City Transit Riders Council. We are very happy about the extension of the Atlantic Ticket field study, which was generated from our council's Freedom Ticket proposal. Atlantic Ticket has discounted fares by as much as 51% and has drastically reduced some 2+ hour commutes down to just 45 minutes. Atlantic Ticket has paved the way for equitable fares in far-flung areas of the city that are priced out of commuter rail service and not close to subways. This is especially important as fares have recently risen and much-needed congestion pricing is on the horizon. Riders need options like those embodied in the Freedom Ticket model. Since its June 6, 2018 launch, Atlantic Ticket has increased daily ridership at Atlantic Terminal by 5%, providing much-needed revenue in a corridor that was operating over half empty during peak hours, getting more out of an underutilized asset. From what we understand, over 870,000 tickets have been purchased and continuing to grow, now at about 20,000 tickets sold per week. With this success, we are looking beyond Atlantic Ticket to address commuting needs elsewhere in the MTA region, to include Metro North Railroad. Meanwhile, current capacity constraints going in and out of Penn Station during peak hours has made this concept challenging, but once East Side access is complete and the East River tunnels are repaired, Penn Station Long Island Railroad must have a Freedom Ticket type fare structure as well, which will be made easier with Omni. Until then, applying the Freedom Ticket model to the Bronx for Metro North riders will help make for faster and more affordable commutes. Therefore, we welcome the opportunity to advance discussions regarding a pilot program for the Bronx. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Colin Wright, followed by Tyler Wright.
Good morning. I'm Colin Wright with Transit Center. My organization, along with Reinvent Albany and our partner organizations, urge you to ensure that the upcoming MTA reorganization is conducted in the interest of transit riders first and in consultation with the public, importantly. In order to be successful, the draft plan that will be presented to you must be the first step in a process that allows for constructive public dialogue. We call on you to post the draft plan online immediately or as soon as you get it, and to engage the public in one or more hearings this summer as part of development of any major consolidation effort. The hearing format ought to provide meaningful opportunity for testimony from outside experts and from community stakeholders. Along with our partner organizations, Transit Center sent a letter to the governor, lawmakers, and you on June 18th that asked critical questions about the reorganization and consolidation. We asked, first, whether the plan would result in clearer lines of accountability and transparency at the MTA. A good start is to allow time for a thorough public vetting of the plan. We all agree that a reorganization effort should result in better service and efficient delivery of transit projects. But a hasty, closed-door push runs the risk of cementing changes that may ultimately prove harmful to the long-term interests of transit riders. There's no need to rush a vote. Service and project delivery indicators are improving throughout the MTA. We heard that earlier this week at the committee meetings, including the Transit Committee meeting under President Byford. Fortunately, there's time, because of this, to carefully pursue meaningful reforms and to conduct all of this business in the light of day. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tyler Wright, followed by Annalisa Freitas.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tyler Wright, and I am a resident of the Bronx, Daily Bus Riders Alliance member. I currently work at the Port Authority and depend on public transportation, especially local buses get to work and run errands. For years, the buses in the Bronx have had issues with bunching, lateness, and overcrowding. My main line is the BX36, which is always bunched and rarely running on schedule. Although I use the bus time app to help me with my planned trip, it is never accurate. In addition, there's always lack of communication, leaving riders confused about delays and rerouting. The unreliability of the bus has made me arrive late to work and at times forced me to walk because my bus did not arrive. In order to attend weekly meetings, I take the BX36 to the 5 train to the BX28. To travel within my borough, it can take me up to 2 hours during peak hours. Traveling within the borough should not be so difficult and time-consuming. When the MTA announced that they were going to redesign the bus plan and was looking forward to saving time when trying to get around in the borough, I looked at the plan online and attended a workshop, and unfortunately, the plan that is being presented does not address the core issues of the unreliable bus service, nor does it make it easier for Bronx riders to get around. What Bronx riders need is more frequent service, faster bus trips, new connection to new destination, and it's easier network to navigate. The MTA planners continue to tell me that because the plan is cost-neutral plan, there's only so much that can be done. I'm concerned, as many other bus riders, and this plan is not going to improve harsher and constantly facing to keep service within a few tweaks, maintain the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Annalisa Freitas, followed by
I'm
Lisa.
Annalisa Freitas. I live in Mott Haven in the South Bronx. I'm a participant of the Riders Alliance, and I'm a frequent Bronx bus rider. So for me, improving the buses is not just about making sure that us bus riders have faster routes and safer transport, but it's an opportunity as well for the city to consider environmental health issues. Relying on the buses to take me as close to my home as possible is a necessity for someone like me because I work a lot of long hours, run evenings, errands, and I get home late. So I've often relied on the BX33 and the BX15 to get me from Manhattan to the Bronx when the trains aren't running. But when those buses aren't running either, walking is a really less than ideal option. Typically after 8 p.m., the buses run less frequently, and on top of that, Mott Haven experiences an average inch particulate matter rate of 7.7, which is according to the NYC Health Data Portal, and it's actually worse than all NYC neighborhoods. So literally just being outside longer can be more harmful to our health. In my neighborhood, like many in the Bronx, there isn't a 9 to 5 work pattern. It's not the only one. My neighbors tend to get up well before the sun rises and come home long after it sets. Once I've waited about 30 minutes or so on a dark night with my arms full of groceries, hoping that the BX15 would show up at any of the listed times posted on the sign. But when it didn't, I walked across the bridge. It wasn't well lit. I was breathing in car exhaust, and this was all just to get my food into the fridge and the freezer. This service is just simply unreliable, and it lacks a true analysis of the migratory patterns of the transit needs and the environmental needs of the city's population. So because of this inefficient service, I opt to bike. Biking is a huge challenge. I also am exposed to aggressive drivers who take up the road. You get pollutants in your eyes and your lungs. Not to mention, by the time I arrive to my destination, I'm soaked in sweat and in whatever extreme weather event has hit that day. If buses were on schedule, I would actually take them. I get to read, I get to educate myself. It's a way for me to not risk my entire body. So I'm really happy that there's a Bronx redesign plan that's set up. But what we really need, Chairman Pat Foy, is to have the funds invested to develop a Bronx bus network redesign that takes care of the 600,000 Bronx lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Daglian, followed by Miriam Fisher.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Daglian. I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, PCAC. I'm here today to again talk about the importance of transparency and public involvement. The MTA is seemingly in the public eye as never before. However, our concern is about what's happening outside of the public eyes. I'm referring to the debarment rules now in effect and the reorganization plan being developed. For those not in the know, the emergency debarment rules were quietly signed off on and presented to the board during the executive session of the May 22nd meeting. They say that the MTA must debar contractors and consultants that are late or go 10% above budget. That's significant. What will happen to East Side Access, PTC, CBTC, new equipment purchases? Do they just stop? If it hadn't been for an item in Politico Pro, which is behind a paywall, these far-reaching regulations might still be a secret, not just from the public, but from the very contractors they're designed to debar. So on May 30th, we sent a letter to the MTA leadership asking why such important business was happening behind closed doors. While we've not yet received a response, we were glad to see a comment period announced in the June 5th State Register. We'll be weighing in and urge others to do so as well. Similarly, we're very concerned about the upcoming reorganization plan being developed by Alex Partners. The MTA's nearly 9 million daily riders undoubtedly have a lot of ideas for reform and a lot to say, and they should be heard. But there is no provision for public involvement. Making sea change decisions should not be done in the dark, but should involve public engagement and discourse. No one is served by the rumors and fear-mongering that's happening now. Change is important, and a holistic look at the best ways to improve service and processes that will benefit the region's riders is the best way to get the best results. But change needs to begin at home at the top. Therefore, we ask that you stop the secrecy and let the public be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Miriam Fisher, followed by William Long.
Miriam Fisher, good morning. I'm representing my own views, but also someone who self-identifies as having an invisible disability, bad back, bad knees, struggles with the subway, and is a former employee of International Center for the Disabled for many decades. I was at an event a few weeks back at Roosevelt House, and there was a representative from the MTA, and I asked if there was anybody on the board with a disability. Now we're talking about, I was told none. Now there are empty seats. I haven't heard a word about anybody who could represent and articulate the needs of people with disabilities who take either public transportation or some of the e-hail cars and live in New York City. Not a word about diversity in terms of disability. Another point I wanted to make was about the cost of construction. There was a recent event sponsored by Colin Wright, who just left, at Transit Center, and I know Andy Byford was there, about comparing the cost of elevators in cities that have seriously reduced costs, Boston and Chicago. And there are models for New York City, and I also quote from an article of May 30th in New York Magazine. New York intends to spend $39 million per station for the next round of accessibility retrofits, which will add elevators and ramps to make stations accessible. Double what it costs in London, 5 times Madrid, 15 times Berlin. There are models of less expensive construction costs in other cities. What are we learning from that? And the other piece was about...
Please conclude your remarks.
The surveillance proposed with 500 policemen for the fare beaters, when we are still rolling out the fare and the contactless Metro cards, and most of the fare beaters who have been caught have
Please
been
conclude your
minorities.
remarks.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next speaker is William Long, followed by Leonard Blade.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Long. I'm a Writers Alliance member and a resident of the South Bronx. I work at JFK Airport. It takes me approximately 2 hours or more to get to work. This includes multiple trains, buses, and headaches. The Bronx desperately needs service to JFK and LaGuardia Airport. Airports are not only for people to fly to and from, but it's also a job center. Approximately 35,000 people are employed at JFK Airport, contributes $30 billion in wages, while LaGuardia contributes up to $6 billion in wages. Both airports allow families to put food on their tables and afford to live in the city that is increasingly becoming more expensive. When MTA announced they were planning a redesign in the Bronx network, to start off with a clean slate, I was excited, and I thought change was coming. After attending a workshop, I was extremely disappointed to hear that this is a cost-neutral plan. The Bronx is an economic disadvantage and is treated as such. Over 500,000 people use buses every day, despite the MTA has decided not to make additional investments improving the bus in the borough of the Bronx. Investing in buses is providing lower-income people with more reliable access to jobs, opportunity, economic mobility. The redesign is a perfect opportunity to create routes to give Bronxites access to more job hubs, like routes into Queens and our airports. Currently, riders have 10 different routes to get to the Bronx to Manhattan, but only 2 routes to get into Queens. Of those 2, to get into Queens, neither connect to airports. The Q50 is going to be scrapped soon. And just to conclude, Chairman Pat Foya, we need him to allocate funds, just as he did in Staten Island. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Leonard Blade, followed by Kevin Zing.
Hello. Okay. Good morning. My name is Leonard Blades. I'm a resident of Brooklyn. I'm a grad student at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, pursuing my master's in disability services and higher education, and I proudly serve as the chairman for the CUNY Coalition for Students with Disabilities, the student representative organization for CUNY's more than 11,000 students with disabilities in CUNY. I'm here to actually just kind of express my my appreciation of MTA creating the newly formed committee which is called the Advisory Committee for Transit Accessibility, also known as ACTA, a committee that I feel fortunate to have been selected to serve on. We actually just had our first meeting not too long ago. You know, Alex Elagoon, and he was there, you know, facilitating the meeting. MTA president Andy Viper was there. We talked a lot about, you know, like the accomplishments of like the bus services, you know, in terms of, I guess, disability etiquette, and, you know, and just talking about what can be done to improve upon, you know, not just for people like myself in wheelchairs, but just for other users of various disabilities as well, and talking about subways and, you know, the fast forward plan, which I really, really hope does come to fruition in terms of making all the subways, you know, well, at least, all the subways accessible, or at least I hope we can get there to that point. And I actually just also want to take a moment with just 30 seconds left, just a moment to echo the sentiment that was made earlier about the Accessoride pilot program. That's how I got here this morning. It really does make a difference, not having to rely constantly on Accessoride and having to make trips in advance because, you know, life is unpredictable, things happen. So I think it's really important to have something that's, you know, affordable and something that we can have on the spot, you know, and just not just in terms of emergencies, but also just in terms of our leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kevin Zing, followed by Liam Blank.
Hello, good morning to Pat Foy and Andy Byford. My name is Kevin Zhang. I also want to regard the M14A and M14D select bus service on Monday, July 1st, 2019. I'm very excited to see new M14A and M14D select bus service and busway along 14th Street between 3rd Avenue and 9th Avenue in both directions. Also, M14 select bus service will get electric articulated bus. In the future, select bus service will be receive busway as well. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Liam Blank, followed by Zachary Barradeline.
Good morning. My name is Liam Blank. I'm the Advocacy and Policy Manager for Tri-State Transportation Campaign, which is a nonprofit dedicated to improving sustainability in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Next month, this board will be faced with an MTA reorganization plan produced by consulting group Alex Partners. And Tri-State sees this as a good opportunity for the MTA to regain public trust, and we have a couple recommendations that can help you achieve this important goal. As soon as the plan is presented to the board, the MTA can enhance the credibility of the reorganization process by posting the plan online for public viewing. Engaging the public in a sustained, substantive discussion will bring to the forefront critical reforms necessary to improve service. Otherwise, as my colleague stated, conducting yet another hasty, closed-door effort will run the risk of cementing changes that may ultimately prove harmful to the long-term interests of transit riders and cause avoidable damage to the MTA's reputation. Reorganizing the agency is no small task, so it's important that the reorganization plan is the result of a process that allows for constructive feedback and dialogue with the public. Aside from conducting a transparent process, we have identified a few aspects of MTA practice and structure that we hope will be addressed by this reorganization. Most importantly, the MTA must establish clear lines of accountability so that the public knows who exactly is responsible for the agency's performance. Without this, the agency has little incentive to improve its performance, and the public feels like their voice is not being heard. Next, the agency should better coordinate construction projects and service delivery by combining capital work and service delivery into a unified entity that can mediate disputes and ensure quick resolution. Doing so would put New York City Transit in the best position to coordinate its fast-forward modernization plan while also running a 24-hour transit system. Another top priority of any reorganization should be to end the MTA-wide hiring freeze and increase investment in employee development in order to retain and attract talent necessary to deliver excellent service. This will reduce the risk of personnel shortages and also boost employee morale. As the MTA undergoes this reorganization, we hope to work with you to ensure this process is transparent and provides substantive benefits for riders. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Zachary Barodeline.
Good morning, members of the committee, members of the public. My name is Zachary Barodkin. I'm from Disability Rights New York. My comments are on the MTA Fast Forward Plan. While I do not doubt that progress is being made to make the subways more accessible, I know that there are a couple of goals in mind, such as having 50 stations accessible by 2020, I believe. What I would like to know is there an evaluation for the progress of these programs? And if there is the public being properly informed on this progress so they too can have a say in the progress and the making of their subways more accessible for everybody, since not all disabilities are visible and some are even temporary. So again, I'm asking, is there a program evaluation for the progress of making these stations accessible, and how can the public be more informed and help in reaching these goals for the MTA? Thank you, and I appreciate your time and understanding.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the public comment.
Thank you very much. Let's begin with approval of minutes. The minutes of the May board meeting and May special board have been distributed to all members and are online for review by members of the public. Any corrections or omissions? If not, can I have a motion to approve both sets of minutes? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Measure passes. Commissioner Schwartz, report on the Finance Committee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first action item for the board to consider was moved to the full board without recommendation at the Finance Committee meeting. This action requests authorization to increase existing new money for transit and commuter projects by expanding or increasing the bond authorization from $3 billion to $5 billion, and to amend the existing supplemental resolution and reimbursement resolution to provide for such increase. At our Finance Committee meeting, there was significant discussion regarding this action, and as chair of the Finance Committee, I had asked staff to provide certain information prior to the issuance of additional debt. Mr. Chairman, at our Finance Committee meeting, and quite frankly, prior to the Finance Committee meeting, I was working with Bob Ferran and other members of the finance staff, where they were helpful in providing a lot of answers to questions I had raised prior to the Finance Committee meeting on this particular matter. One of the things that was brought to my attention is that when you look at the 2010 through 14 capital program, as well as the 2015 through 19 capital program, when you break down all the projects by category, one of the categories was future, which meant that none of these projects in this category was even, I don't think, even in the planning stage, let alone in the design or construction phase. That was 21 in the 10 through 14, and 237 projects in the 15 to 19. So one of the things that I asked and have requested is that all of these projects, and my understanding is in talking with you as well as with Bob, I've gotten your assurance that none of these projects will move forward until we've had a chance to go back and review all these projects and to determine the importance and necessity of these projects going forward, since to date there has been no movement on these projects. So I think we need to reevaluate all of them and understand it, and I'm happy that a former colleague of mine, and as well as friend Rob Mahika, is now on the board. Obviously, I've worked with Rob for many, many years. He's first class, and there's no one better to work with him and his staff also to go through these projects. The second thing is, when you looked at the categories, there were not a lot, but enough projects that were either deemed not to be on time or on budget. And obviously, one of the criticisms that this agency has gotten in the past, and we want to eliminate going forward in the future, is too many major projects have gone way over budget and have been far too late. The public deserves better. The taxpayers deserve better. So I've asked that prior to any additional, that any monies from this additional borrowing not go to paying bills for any project that's either late or not on budget until we've had a chance to better understand why it is and if there is a way to get those projects back on time and on budget. I appreciate very much that I've gotten your personal assurance, as well as Bob's, that I and a finance committee will receive this information prior to any monies being expended. And I have to believe, based on our conversation at the finance committee meeting, that by the time you'll go out and sell the notes, you can easily have that information, probably have it to us so we can have it for discussion at the next meeting in July. The other thing I would just ask before I look, and I am comfortable as chair of the finance committee, and I would recommend to the other members of the board to now adopt this resolution based on the commitment that I received from you and Bob, is, as we've all become aware, the MTA is going to present to the board the 2020 through 24 capital program in September. I just want to make sure, as chair of the finance committee, that all the cost containment recommendations that were made by the cost containment committee are factored into that capital program, as well as any recommendations that are relevant and pertinent that were made by the procurement working group and any other working group who made recommendations where it falls within the umbrella of capital programs. So that cost of these programs, the whole process of how these programs will transpire, that those reforms and recommendations have been included and factored in. The last thing I want to say before we get to this action item is I want, working with the Finance Committee and with CPOC and anybody else on the board that doesn't sit on those two committees to work with, is we need to do a review of our capital program process. I appreciate very much. I got an email from Susan Metzger last night, which she shared with me, the Port Authority press release that they put out on their new capital program. And I know you're very familiar with the Port Authority's process, but one of the things that I found interesting and worthwhile for further discussion is that every 2 years they're required to do a reevaluation. I think that's something worthwhile. Nothing in life is static, probably except death, unfortunately, but nothing is static. The world evolves, life evolves, decisions and decision-making evolves. So something that you thought was very valuable and important and a priority today may not be so 2 years from now or 3 years from now. And something that's not even on our radar screen today becomes urgent and a priority a year from now or 2 years from now. And I think we need to have a process in place where we have that kind of stream of consciousness, that flexibility to look at that, as well as look at other processes. The City of New York has a 10-year capital program, I believe, other agencies, and we should look at whether or not there are other models out there that we should consider and incorporate or include going forward in our own capital process, so that we can make it better, more accountable, and more efficient. So putting that on the record, I move this action item
I second it.
to increase the borrowing from $3 to $5 billion.
I second it. You've got Commissioner Schwartz and board members, my support and Bob Ferrand's on this effort.
I'd just briefly like to explain why I'm going to vote no on this. My no is not in any regard to the capacity or the expertise or the magician work that Bob Foran and his team have to pull off every single day to cover the expenses, both capital and operating, for this agency. My no vote is a statement in opposition that we are in a position to continually borrow, and we've heard about our increasing debt service and debt load when there are still outstanding receipts from the state and, quite frankly, the city.
So can I ask Bob Ferrand just to speak to the state issue for just a second and respond to that comment?
Certainly. We're all aware of the extraordinary extra effort that both the state and the city did to support the 15 to 19 capital program. The monies from the state have all been appropriated. The monies are there. Again, reminding everyone that the business understanding was that we would use our resources first, and then we would use resources from the city and state on a pro rata basis. Both the city and state did have commitments that they funded up to this point, so monies have been flowing. We are right now committing against $3 billion worth of the state's money. Okay, so we've let contracts against $3 billion. We're starting to see some of those expenditures come in. More will come in, but we really expect it'll probably be about a year before the commitments really hit. We think, based on our cash flows, that the debt that we have built into our financial plan that you have approved, and it's in the Capital Program Review Board has approved, we're not going beyond that amount of debt. We think we probably will expend all of our debt for our portion of the capital program sometime next year. Could be mid-year, could be late next year, 2020, depending on how fast the expenditures come in. But we're comfortable right now that we are going to receive the additional funding from both of our funding partners, the state and the city, which again will come in on kind of a parity basis as we go forward. But there's never a clear, sharp line when one stops and the next starts. It's going to overlap a bit. But we do feel confident that working with state DOB that the funds are going to be there.
Thank you, Bob. Andrew.
I'm just wondering what the upshot of Chairman Schwartz's understanding that he says he has with you, Mr. Chairman, and with Bob Ferrand. What does that mean for projects that we know right now are over budget and possibly running late, such as East Side Access and several others I could name? Does that mean they stop right now, pending looking into them further, or does the work on them?
No, of course not. That's what not what Commissioner Schwartz said. Commissioner Schwartz has asked appropriately for additional information, and there was discussion at the Finance Committee meeting, and many of you participated or heard it. I think that information request is entirely reasonable. The staff has that information. It's going to be provided to the Finance Committee and any other board member who wants it. So I think that's entirely appropriate. Second is continuing the work of the construction cost containment effort that Scott Reckler, when he was on the board, Commissioner Schwartz, Jano, and his team have made, I think, extraordinary progress. And in the last 2 or 3 meetings, we've reported on the work that's been done by MTA, Capital Construction, and each of the agencies, Transit, TBTA, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. We've got further to do in terms of internalizing those reforms. And it is absolutely clear to me that we can be more efficient procurers and builders than we've been in the past, which is a way of stretching, doing the right thing with respect to taxpayer and customer dollars, and expanding the size of the capital plan without requiring additional money from state or city or federal funders. Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I just like to, my constant rejoinder of my concern about rising levels of debt service. And I've been particularly concerned because everything we're hearing here is the expectation that sometime we're going to run into a major recession. And the question of, is this going to put us in the position of having an expense budget, 19% of which is dedicated to debt service? and the possibility that we can't get these notes refinanced because of the turmoil in the system or because the revenue streams start to dry up. So that's my primary concern. I'll vote for this, but I think when you start hit 19% and potentially go higher, the city is capped at 15%. I'm getting very concerned that at some point we're going to fall off a cliff and confront the riding public with a major increase in costs.
Robert.
I just want to in support of Larry's motion here, as we move forward to develop a new capital plan, we have these 5-year plans that haven't really been 5-year plans, or people expect they're 5-year plans, but they actually turn out to be much longer than 5-year plans. For things within our control, some things outside of our control. So as we build a new plan, I think it's important to understand where we are with the current capital plan, where we are on those projects. Are we spending more than we said we were going to spend? Because then we're going to have to figure out how to do those projects. Or are those projects, why are they late? If they're, maybe we don't need them anymore, and if it's 5 years into the plan and you haven't even begun the project yet, it was obviously articulated that it was a priority 5 years ago. 5 years into it, you haven't done anything yet. It's time to reevaluate those projects. And this is all part of the new plan, because you can't start a new 5-year plan without understanding where you are with the present 5-year plan. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Norman.
Yeah, you know, like everyone else, I'm in favor of on time and on budget, and I just really, but I want some clarification as to sort of how the mechanics of this work, of what your resolution, how it evolve, how will it evolve going into the future. And as you know, on time and on budget worldwide in transit projects is sort of a rarity, and hopefully we will be leading edge in purity going forward and on time and on budget. I mean, you know, what do we got to do to get there? I hope this will help us get there. However, how do the mechanics of this work? Say we get a project that's in a new capital plan, and we engage going forward with whoever our provider is, and at some point the schedule begins to slip. Now, when does it trigger the sort of hammer or stick in your proposal? When does that begin to engage? The minute that, as soon as we say, well, okay, we have an unavoidable schedule slippage now, at that point, do they fall into sort of a finance limbo where they have to get their money from some other? I mean, I clearly don't understand this, so if it's a muddled question, no. I apologize.
First of all, my issue has nothing to do with the new 20 to 24 capital program that isn't even out yet, that we'll get a draft copy of in September. The questions I had, the issues I raised, had to do with the 2015 through 2019 current capital program, as well as the 2010 to 2014 capital programs. There's a number of projects that are currently listed as not on time and not on budget. As Bob and others explained to the Finance Committee, they need the flexibility that when they need the money to pay for existing projects that have already been budgeted and we've already approved, that when they need to go and sell notes, they have the flexibility to do that. They're not even looking to sell those notes probably at least for another month, possibly longer. What I asked them on behalf of myself and other members of the Finance Committee, as well as the full board, is I would like to understand why these projects that you listed currently are not on time and not on budget. There may be very valid reasons why they all are not on time and on budget. And then some of them may not have valid reasons. Or there are solutions to get them back on budget and back on time. And as members of this board have raised concerns about debt service levels, right? Operating cost issues, budget issues, making sure that we approve capital projects to do the best of our ability. We're never going to achieve perfection, but we should try to achieve near perfection, is to try to make sure that all our capital projects get done on budget, on time, or as close as possible to on time and on budget. So all I'm trying to do on behalf of myself, as well as on behalf of other board members, is to do our due diligence, to ask questions, to get answers, because when you learn about these things after the fact, it's too late. There's nothing that we can do about it. I think it's the same. A similar example would be, I think, is how aggressive we've been on staying on top of positive train control, with Neil, Commissioner Zuckerman, Commissioner Metzger, others, to try to force to make sure this project gets done by December of 2020. But we don't want to be in a position where we're reading in the newspapers or we're getting briefings where, we have a big problem and it's too late. So again, all I'm looking for, I'm not looking to stop a project that's currently under construction. That was never my intent. My intent was to acquire and gather additional information so that I and other members of this board can make intelligent suggestions and recommendations on how to maybe address things that are currently going on.
So can I just ask a question of clarification in terms of what we're voting for? Let's assume in the next week or two, one of those 250 projects that is not yet started or is in the group that you talked about is brought to our attention, and we say, no, we don't think, or we agree that it shouldn't go forward, as Bob said, that it's a different time, doesn't make any sense. What is the impact of what we're approving here on that particular project?
Nothing.
Thank you, Pat. I just feel compelled to respond to the comment that on time and on budget is a rarity in transit. I think the point is that's got to change. We are where we are now, but if something was in a capital plan 5 or 10 years ago and wasn't even started, we should have been asking these questions a long time ago. And I think it behooves us to ask these questions now. We are where we are, as I said, but I think the point of this is we all need to get more engaged in what the planning process is and what the projects are. You know, government works for the people, and we have an obligation to make sure that the planning process makes sense and works. Otherwise, it's all dysfunctional, and money gets wasted, and plans are for naught. So I just wanted to respond to that. Thank you, Pat.
Yeah, well, don't think that I don't want to get on time and on budget. My statement was merely a statement of fact. These are very complex projects, and it's quite often this is why transit projects often end up this way. It's very difficult when you go into the project to determine each and every instance that's going to break down in the course, and the PTC is the perfect example of this. And the extensions, you know, if we were to review the discussion Larry raised there, which is entirely correct about PTC, there's been, and I think wherever Sarah is, Sarah will know, the federal government has extended their time limits on this thing, I think 3 times, right? And it's not to say that, I mean, it's very difficult to perceive and I'm not excusing it either, and I support we want to be on time and budget, but the point that has to be made is when you make the plan is the time to make those provisions and not do rosy projections of a thing being done magically in a particular period of time. So that's the point. And then when we get further along the line, as Larry brought up, knowing, now that he clarified it for me, it makes a lot more sense that as you see these problems develop, and that's really my point and my goal is I want to see those punch lists that aren't accomplished when they're not accomplished, and what we can do at that point rather than wait, to pull the financing rug out of them at another stage.
I think, Commissioner Brown, I also think with Governor Cuomo's reform initiative to have the vast majority of projects be under the design build category, as Commissioner Lacewell stated, on a going forward basis, a lot of these issues that have been problematic in the past will not be a problem going forward in the future, because the liability is going to be on the contractors, not on the agency, not on the riders, not on the taxpayers.
From your lips to God's ears.
So we've got a motion from Commissioner Schwartz. I second. If there are no further comments, let's take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain. Good. Commissioner Schwartz, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following 5 action items were moved to the board with recommendation. The first of these action items requests board approval for the MTA and TBTA reimbursement of Central Business District Tolling Program capital costs for federal tax purposes. The next action item requests board authorization for transportation revenue anticipation notes to provide for short-term liquidity. Next board authorization is requested for the all-agency general contract procurement guidelines and the all-agency service contract procurement guidelines. The fifth action item is for board authorization for the MTA paid family leave program for all non-represented employees at the MTA agencies. And the last action item requests the board authorize actions relating to the estimated payment of the state assessment of the MTA and its constituent agencies for the Public Work Enforcement Fund for calendar 2019. I move these actions. There is one non-competitive procurement for $884,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. There are 5 competitive procurements in the amount of $40.9 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. All in favor? Opposed?
Sorry.
It's okay.
There is one ratification for $1.3 million. The committee recommends this ratification. I move it.
All in favor? Opposed?
There are 13 real estate action items this month described on pages 129 through 158 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
Pat?
Commissioner Law, Commissioner Vanderpool.
I want to recuse myself on any of the real estate transactions. I've never heard of any of these companies, but I don't know who all the principals are of these companies, and just to make sure there's no conflict, I'd like to recuse myself, and I also like to restate a recommendation I made at the committee meetings the other day, that we get so much paperwork, especially ahead of the meetings, hundreds of pages, and it's easy maybe to miss. And so belts and suspenders, I suggest that on the agendas, we list the name of the companies of anybody we're given a contract to, procurement to, or lease license or sale to, and identify the principals. It may be a couple more pages, but I think it benefits all of us to make sure there are no conflicts.
I think that's an important safeguard. Monica, let's work on that for the July meeting. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner.
I'd just like to amend a position I took on a real estate item on Monday's committee. So for those of you who were paying sharper attention than I was at the end of 7 hours of meetings, I voted against the Lawrence Station lease agreement, which I actually support because it was charging rent for the first 3 years. I was trying to make a statement against not charging rent for 3 years for the Riverhead lease agreement. So I'd like to correct the record and say I am in support of the Lawrence Station lease agreement.
Thank you. You have anything else, Larry?
Just vote.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
That concludes the Finance Committee report.
And we'll mark Commissioner Law's abstention. Thank you. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There is one board resolution for consideration and approval. As chair of the Transit Committee, I presented a board resolution that addresses serial criminal recidivism in the transit system. The resolution recognizes that we need to continue with our efforts to protect the public and our transit workers from certain convicted perpetrators in our system who repeatedly break the law. This proposed resolution makes recommendations for the MTA to work with law enforcement, the New York State Legislature, and the criminal justice system regarding the issue, and sends a message to the public and our employees about how important this issue is to the MTA. One point I wanted to raise. You may remember on Monday during committee discussion, some members of the committee raised language concerns I said that I was open to anyone who had suggested language to edit the resolution or make changes to the resolution. Commissioner Lynn followed up with me and has 2 recommended changes. The changes were totally fine with me. I think originally folks had the old board resolution at their chairs. Now they have the new one. I will point out for folks what the changes are. In number 1, Commissioner Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm reflecting your suggestions. Under number 1, Commissioner Lynn suggests adding parenthesis, e.g., individuals committing repeated acts of physical and/or sexual assault, robbery, etc. So in other words, that basically takes number 1 and just clarifies that when we're talking about what I refer to as serial criminal recidivists, we're referring to individuals committing repeated acts of physical and/or sexual assault, robbery, etc. The second edit that Commissioner Lynn suggested was in number 7. Which is a very small language change, and the number 7 now states that until action is taken, the MTA will work with law enforcement and criminal justice community to recommend and seek significant penalties for serial criminals preying upon workers or the public in the transit system. I think that the only language addition there is that you added recommend.
You had harshest possible penalties.
Oh,
I
and so we're
imagine
changing it to
was
seek significant penalties,
yes.
which I'm very comfortable with. And then, Chairman Foy, you suggested in number 2 that we, after certain perpetrators, we add the language repeatedly convicted of serious crimes from the transit system, which is also an edit that I'm quite comfortable with. So to summarize, the edits that I've received on this resolution basically seek to clarify the individuals we're talking about here, which I'm quite comfortable with. We have been talking about serial criminal recidivists, people who enter the transit system seeking to commit crimes, significant crimes against the riding public and our workers. I'm quite comfortable with all of these.
So if you make a motion on your amended resolution, I'll second it.
Okay, I make a motion.
Good. All in favor? Discussion?
Aye.
Discussion? Commissioner?
I am not a member of the Transit Committee, and so I apologize if I missed a long discussion you had. Can you just talk about maybe what the practical activity then the MTA will do? The last section says the MTA will work with others. So whether that is Tom's work or MTA Police, what is the actual work we're going to do this?
No, I'm happy to. So the conversation you missed was a long back and forth on this. So this is something that MTA has been seeking to address for some time. The belief at the MTA, which I have been persuaded by, is that we need the state legislature to act on this issue. Right. And so, and that we cannot act alone. The resolution seeks to lay out a clear position, to draw a line in the sand, to state that we will do all that we can on our sort of side of the issue. But in terms of the practical reality, there's nothing. We can't ban anyone right now, and we won't be able to. Exactly. In fact, I think in the early drafts, the board resolution started with, "It is the sense of the board, number 1."
So can I just add briefly to that? I agree with everything that Commissioner Feinberg said. One is Governor Cuomo on Monday or Tuesday, issued a strong statement in support of the resolution, point 1. Point 2, Senator Savino in the state Senate had a bill that was comparable, similar to the resolution that Commissioner Feinberg just described. That bill passed the state Senate. It was not adopted in the Assembly. 3, I think what we will do is, as the legislature is out of session, not expected to come back until January, this ought to be a top priority in our legislative agenda, and I would expect that before too long we begin discussions with the governor's office and Senate and Assembly leadership to get something passed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, as I said at the Transit Committee, I'm going to abstain from this vote. I still have concerns about this resolution, and I've passed around a document from some of the advocates around civil liberties that have come to me overnight. I haven't analyzed it, but I do have some general concerns. Obviously, I support the overall intent. My loved ones take the transit. I'm worried about the abuse of and attacks on workers. I don't want to do anything that's going to inadvertently have an impact well beyond that of what we're trying to shoot at. And there has been history of this kind of stuff. Essentially, we have to define what recidivism means. We can't mush together issues of sexual abuse and other kinds of crimes. And I don't want to drive people out of the system through a ban that essentially makes sure they have to continue in their criminal enterprises, because now they can't get to work, or in the case of other kinds of mental health problems, can't get even to a therapist to help them cure themselves or get beyond it. I'll tell you why I'm also very concerned. My first meeting at this board was in 2016, and I was presented statistics on fare evasion, stops and arrests for that year, which fortunately has changed, but still remains problematic. 130,000 stops, 30,000 arrests, almost totally black and Latino. There was no equity here. Now we've heard fare evasion is across the city of New York, and the question of equitable treatment of people of color is of great concern here. So I think we have to be very careful as we implement bans that we don't replicate some of the problems that have occurred before. Once having said that, I'm going to abstain. I'm not voting against this. I think we can craft a document talking about banning, which will protect both the workforce and the riders. I support Commissioner Schwartz's idea of having cameras wherever we can as a deterrent. I'm just worried that we don't, use a sledgehammer to take on a problem which is severe, but is dropping every month that we have reports. And essentially, with the new 500 police officers coming in, also aimed at protecting the public, hopefully, that this may be overkill. But again, I'm more than willing to work with people. I've already said to Sarah, we'll bring in some of the advocates and their concerns. You have it. I think that we passed it along because of the help from Commissioner Foy. I think we can do something here that's meaningful, but that doesn't have an unintended consequence. Thank you.
Mayor, can I respond? I am, as Commissioner Jones and I spoke this morning, I'm more than happy to talk with him and to talk with those who he has heard from, groups, organizations, individuals he has heard from. I have no interest in us taking some action in a vacuum that doesn't think through intended and unintended consequences. I'm more than happy to meet with those folks. I would welcome the opportunity to meet with those folks. I've only been on this board for a few months, and so some of you have worked with me in the past, some of you haven't. I think transparency is really important. I think openness to hearing other people's opinions is really important. I'll meet with anyone. I'll take any meeting. I'll have a conversation with anyone. It actually drives me a little crazy when organizations write letters before actually reaching out and just asking if we could have a conversation about it, because I'd be more than happy to do so. And so I hope this serves as an invitation to anyone to reach out to me and we can have a longer conversation. Look, the legislature should not write legislation or act on legislation without consulting the experts at the MTA. The experts in law enforcement, the experts on this board, the experts on our staff. I would hope that anything they do, they'll be consulting us, and we will be able to thread this needle. I agree it's really important to get this right. But I also think it's really important to take action when we've got reports from the police about people entering the system and being arrested 20, 30, 40, 50 times for sexually assaulting women, kids, and robbing folks. We have to do something about those individuals.
Good. Any further comments on this subject? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? One abstention. Terrific. Sarah, back to you.
Okay. There's one non-competitive procurement for New York City Transit for $500,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
All in favor? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions.
Thank
Sarah.
you. There are 9 competitive procurements for New York City Transit for $100 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Good.
There's 1 ratification for New York City Transit for $7.5 million. The committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
Second. All in favor? Opposed?
This concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
Thank you. Dr. Metzger, you chaired the Joint Railroad Committee this month.
Yes, I did. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Metro North Railroad Committee and the Long Island Railroad Committee met jointly, and we report the following. Metro North requests approval of 1 action item. That action item allows us to increase the per-ticket subsidy for the Westchester County Department of Public Works and Transportation bus shuttle unit tickets. The action would be effective with the sale of the August 2019 Metro North tickets. The committee recommends this item, and I move it.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
There are 2 competitive procurements this month, both for MTA Capital Construction. The 2 railroads were incredibly frugal and have no procurements. MTA Capital Construction has 2 procurements in the total amount of $42.3 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
In addition, the committee had a discussion on Kawasaki's performance in the M9 contract, and the committee agreed to and approved Mr. Zuckerman's motion to send Kawasaki a letter requesting their attendance at the next, which would be July, MTA Board meeting. This is because we appear to be significantly off schedule and budget. And along that line, I'd like the board to know that the committee and the PTC working group continue to monitor the performance of our contractors for PTC. And with your permission, sir, I would like the chair of the working group, Mr. Zuckerman, to explain what actions we're taking in the coming month in order to see that we meet our deadline.
I'd welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just listening to Commissioner Schwartz and some of the responses, whether Linda's or Robert's, I will say that this is my start of my 4th year in this seat as the Putnam County rep, and I will tell you the level of activism is inspiring, motivating, and absolutely necessary for taxpayers. And I'll share 2 points related to this activism that we're trying to do in the Metro North world. The first is on positive train control. As you've heard me say before, and I say this in part for our new board members and those who do not attend the Metro North or Long Island Railroad meetings, because that is a sparsely attended meeting, I will say as well, and I invite all my friends who are other residents of other parts of the world to join that early morning meeting. We asked for the first time ever that I know of in board history to have management come from the contractor and explain where they were. I asked for that of Ronnie. She executed that for January. We had them come back in February, and then we amplified that with a very big conversation in the last board meeting for a much bigger and much more intensive meeting with Bombardier and Siemens. At that point, I made a statement saying that I would like to investigate the mysteries of Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh being both the city where the activities are occurring for much of the Bombardier Siemens contract, where they have a test bed, building software, as well as a book I enjoy by Michael Chabon, his first book, if you like him. If you haven't read his work, highly recommend it, but that's a personal edification there. So we're going to go look at the mysteries of Pittsburgh. Myself, Rhonda is going to join Randy Glucksman, and I will strong-arm Mr. Law into joining us as well when we find out what a rigorous and exciting schedule we have packed there. And we're doing that, yes, to see how things are on the ground, but frankly, we're doing it to demonstrate to our contractors that we mean business, that we are not fooling around, that the money and the time and the effort of this board and of the taxpayers and of the employees of the MTA cannot be wasted. I will not say that the contractors have full complicity. We share some as well, both as a board and as employees, but we are going and taking time off from our day jobs and going on a Monday of a holiday week to show we care and we demand progress. So that is the first point I want to make on PTC, and we will report back at the July board meeting about how that tour went. Yes, ma'am. Yes, and the president of Siemens, I understand, is coming as well to the MTA for a conversation next week as well, and I think that will ensure that we demonstrate our interest and care and attention to this topic, which to me, in my opinion, is the #1 issue Metro North faces.
Thank you.
Susan, Mr. Chairman, so if I could just amplify some of Susan's comments. So at the committee, I'm now referring to the Kawasaki matter. 2 months ago, when the Governor Cuomo appointed me to the board, he asked me 3 things. He said, don't accept the status quo, ask questions, and demand results. And so in our briefing, we learned that yet again, another multinational billion-dollar company was late and will be late in delivering new M9 trains to the Long Island Railroad. And it's just not acceptable. And what I said then is, I'll repeat it now, is that budgets matter and deadlines matter. And our vendors need to know that. And so Neil backed me up, and we approved a motion unanimously, and we're demanding that now the CEO of Kawasaki come before us and explain why they're delaying again, why there's more cost overruns, and this is Siemens all over again. And so our vendors need to know, especially when there's only a couple of vendors in the entire world who do work for us, and there's not much competition. They have to know that this board is upset and will not accept that type of performance going forward. And we've asked him to appear before us at the July meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, you know, and I recognize you guys have a different status in life than me, and perhaps you're used to getting results by calling the CEO of the world in front of you to explain things, but I wouldn't want that process. You guys go ahead with that process, and like I said, you expect results from that, and you know, and I hope you do get results from it. However, I wouldn't want that done at the expense of our contact and interface with their local people that are in charge of this. The managers that manage this stuff worldwide, the main thing they're doing is putting quality people in charge of these programs. Now, when I was on the tools, I worked with these Kawasaki people, and I'm not accustomed to defending non-union providers. I mean, they have a non-union facility up in Yonkers, and they seem to do pretty well up there. So, you know, it's not my job. I'm going to have enough trouble defending the workers at Metro North. But the issue, though, gets to be, if we're calling them on the carpet, yet we're not reviewing what they're actually short on. Now, I found I wasn't able to make the Monday meeting, and I apologize for taking your time now, but which I would have brought up at the Monday meeting were I here. But a couple things I was curious about when President Ng, who's a very precise guy, he's an engineering guy, said that they were 75% complete, I believe. You know, I wanted to know what the numerator and the denominator was in that 75%. I want to see the punch list. I want to see what's not done and talk to the people and see which of these are serious problems. Doesn't mean you don't want to have the CEO, you know, snap your fingers and make him jump. That's cool. You know, go ahead, do that. But the local people are very competent people, and they work very hard. And they have competent technicians. It's not, and I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've been here a pretty long time, but the Kawasaki vehicles on each facility, Metro North, Long Island, and the Transit Authority, are the best performing vehicles you have. And I also believe historically they have achieved timely and on budget deliveries. And this again goes to the complexity that each new vehicle, each new generation of vehicles gets more and more complex. You're asking it to do more and more things. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what's holding them up, but I don't think we should abandon the practical process of reviewing what's actually the problem with the vehicles based on Kawasaki's excellent performance in the past. And you know, of course, it's what have you done for me today, and what are you going to do for me tomorrow? You know, we want them to perform on this, and we want them to deliver too. I don't think it's analogous at all to the Bombardier being 5 years behind on the delivery. Is it 5 years they're behind on the delivery of yeah, it's a long time. And Kawasaki lost the bid to Bombardier for that tranche of vehicles because they were 10% higher on the bid. Well, the 10% has been eaten up in us not getting the vehicles. So it's not like Kawasaki has not performed for us in the past. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see the CEO. I mean, I like to see these accomplished people come before us. You know.
Mr. Zuckerman and then Mr. Albert.
And look, Mr. Brown, I have great respect for you, and I appreciate what you said. I would describe this as both an and, so it's a tool we have as a board that we must take advantage of. It is not in lieu of paying attention deeply at the practical level. That's for management. But as a board, one of the levers we do have is to ensure that the most senior management apply the right resources and know that the commercial relationship they have with this enterprise can be in jeopardy. And I don't think that stands in the way at all with what you're saying, which is the men on the ground, the women on the ground doing the work are where the rubber hits the road, both literally and figuratively. But as a lever we have, I believe that ensuring that management, the client's management, is brought to bear, that knows how important we are as a $17 billion enterprise and one of the marquee setting agencies in the country, if not the world, are important. And it is cool, yes, but I think it's much more than cool. I think it is precedent setting to ensure that we will not accept mediocre service anymore.
Mr. Albert.
Yeah, to back up what many of my fellow members are saying, late vehicles have huge financial implications for this agency. In the case of the 2.5-year late R179s from Bombardier, we've had to keep in service unbelievably old R32s and R42s, which I'm told are the oldest transit vehicles running anywhere in the world with the possible exception of Argentina. So that costs this agency extra money to keep these well past their prime vehicles running. So, you know,
But just as importantly, more importantly, these cars have lower mean distance between failures than newer cars. So it's not only a financial cost to the MTA, it hurts our customers, it hurts on-time performance, it's bad all around.
It's bad all around.
And
telling the CEOs that we have a problem with this, I have no problem with that.
So 2 points about that. In the real world, actually, CEOs come to customers like ours where we're spending billions of dollars, right? They don't have to be invited. Point one. Point two is one of the characteristics of CBTC, PTC, and rolling stock where we're having these issues is a duopoly of suppliers, basically 2 suppliers. That's no longer going to be the case with respect to CBTC because of work that Andy Byford and his team have done in qualifying a 3rd CBTC supplier. But the fact that there are basically 2 suppliers on rolling stock, basically 2 suppliers on PTC, and until very recently 2 suppliers on CBTC results in higher cost, it results in less competition, and frankly, it results in less innovation. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, and this is another point I really want to make, and I don't want this I consider, not that I'm an expert on it, but I think it's something we're missing here, is we're conflating the 2 sort of systems we're dealing with. We have an ongoing relationship with Kawasaki and the car manufacturers. And when we wrote the contracts, we put in liquidated damages provisions so we're on the other side of the cue ball relative to where we are with the PTC. The PTC will be responsible for paying fines when and if it's late. But the opposite's true for the contractors that aren't going to be delivered. If they're not going to deliver on time, they have responsibilities to fulfill the provisions of the liquidated damage clauses. Now, again, back to my original point is we've done this already with the Kawasaki agreement. You've already written in the liquidated damages into it and showing them further that for your next agreement, we're going to forget about all the great cars you made in the past, and this last one's we're going to judge you on today's performance. If that's the way you want to go forward, that's the way you want to go forward. But it's not the PTC is not analogous to the car procurement. And there's, and though your point about market concentration is correct, and if we got 3 instead of 2, we used to have 5 bidders on these things. And when I started on the board, there was typically 5 bidders on these things. And the nature of, I guess, the nature of the economy since 2008 has led to fewer and fewer people.
Significant increase in merger and acquisition activity and significant reduction in the number of players.
And I understand you were a mergers and acquisitions expert. Too.
I plead guilty. Anybody else? Larry?
Yeah, listen, I applaud Neil, Susan, Kevin for what you're doing in taking that aggressive approach. I mean, that's the approach I think we need to take all the time going forward when projects are late or not on budget. We need to ask questions, and we need to get real answers, and we need to get assurances. And sometimes we need to use whatever stick is necessary to make sure that we hold these contractors accountable. And quite frankly, if we hadn't taken the aggressive approach that we took with Siemens and Bombardier, I don't think we would be in a much better place, even though I still think they need to give us even greater assurances as opposed to just throwing more money on the table and say, trust me. I'm not there yet on that because they've been saying, trust me, for a long time, and they haven't come through. But I think because we've taken an aggressive approach, and I think it sends a loud and clear message, not just to Kawasaki, but to all contractors, we're not messing around anymore. We're going to be monitoring very closely all of these projects, and when we see something wrong or we see something that's not on time and not on budget, we're going to bring you in, and we're going to ask a lot of tough questions. And if you guys want to invite me to your Metro North Long Island Railroad meeting, I'll spruce up on my Japanese as I did on my German for a couple months ago. Thank you.
Susan? Susan?
Ronnie very carefully crafted a letter to Bombardier Siemens, and I understand Norman's concerns. I'd be happy to work with Ronnie to see that we can craft an equally nice letter to Kawasaki.
Nice but belligerent. Yeah.
Polite. And I agree with Commissioner Schwartz that it's time for us to step up and be a little bit more proactive than I think we have been. I also agree with him on the various points that he made about the capital plan. And in January of this year, we had a discussion at the Metro North Committee about what the Metro North component of the capital plan would be, and decided that we needed to start looking at it sooner than we normally do. September is almost upon us, and we need information as soon as possible because it comes in too late to really think about it. So I had charged Neil, poor Neil, with talking to all of the various board members and talking with Metro North and then making a report back. And he did that on Monday. Can you briefly summarize that?
Obviously, that's not one of my skill sets, is brief. Thank you, Sue. I do appreciate your leadership. So let me just state this. The two bigger issues that the MTA are facing are, one, our $1 billion shortfall in 2022, and secondly, positive train control. I believe those take precedence over new capital spend. But we were having a capital discussion, and it was important to understand what capital opportunities we have. Tom Prendergast used to say it's one system. It's one system. And I believe in that. It's one system. And if transit needs more things than Metro North or Long Island Railroad, I personally am supportive of that. However, in the last capital plan, Long Island Railroad received 38% more than Metro North, and New York City Transit had 528% more than Metro North. And I believe, and from the purposes of our conversation, we want to ensure that some of the things that are being proposed for Metro North are seen by the consumer, by the rider, and not just back of house. We discussed a number of topics. They included Northern Hudson Valley Station improvements, which I won't go through, and I will not bring out my piece of rebar I brought here on Monday. Again, you missed a great committee.
Thank
Ada,
you.
you would have seen me holding that up. That was really fun, although I think it had tetanus, so that's a problem. Electrification of the Hudson line from Croton Harmon up to Poughkeepsie. direct access of the Hudson Line to Penn Station, which right now does not exist, although the railway is there, and rebuilding and increasing the capacity through the viaduct at 125th Street, which is one of the only ways we're going to find a way to increase throughput into Grand Central. These and others were talked about. These and others were raised to the management because we would like to ensure that things the riders need to see are done over time, because again, it's one system, but we cannot let parts of the system go untouched for decades at a time. So thank you, Sue, for both your time to speak and your leadership.
Right, let me just make the following observation, which is that the state budget passed in April dealt with the discrepancy issue in terms of aid, right? The law says that congestion pricing and the other revenue sources go 80% to New York City Transit and 10% each to Long Island Railroad and Metro North. Robert.
Just to put a finer point on the contracting process, we spend $30+ billion. Next capital plan is going to be $40+ billion, whatever it's going to be. We should be agnostic as to who the contractor is. Deadlines matter. When they say they're going to meet a deadline and they say they're going to do it at this price point, it matters. Liquidated damages clauses are designed not to ever be triggered. If they trigger them and they're okay with it, it wasn't tough enough and it wasn't hard enough, because they just never want to trigger a liquidated damages clause. So every contractor, doesn't matter how big the project, needs to understand there are consequences. We are paying attention going forward, and they need to know that, so they need to be real. We didn't come up with some of these project deadlines, they did. When they competed, they made a commitment to do that. You look outside these windows, you look outside these buildings, the buildings go up, they go up on time, they go up on schedule, and they go on budget. If it's not acceptable for the private sector, it should not be acceptable for us going forward, and we need to make sure going forward that we're holding them accountable. You need to go to the managers at the bottom level, find out why it happened, but the corporate offices need to understand that there are real consequences, and consequences sometimes mean money and sometimes mean there are no more contracts, and it means that as you go forward, it might have been nice what you did last time, but now you need to do it again, because every dollar that we spend costs the taxpayers money and the riders money.
Thank you.
I think what you hear is that the board is of one mind when it comes to being proactive in getting things done on time and on schedule, and I appreciate that very much. And with that, this concludes the Joint Railroad Committee report.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerman.
I think this will be the last time you have to hear from me today. Mr. Chair, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Monday, and there are no actions to take this month. Thank you very much.
Well done. With that, I'd like to introduce the MTA's new Inspector General, Carolyn Picorni. Ms. Picorni is here to talk about her new role as Inspector General and the focus of her recent work at the MTA. Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Pat. Before I begin, I want to thank my predecessor, Barry Kluger. He has devoted his entire career to public service, and he's been a tremendous help and a true gentleman as I transition into my new role. A word on my background. I am a career federal prosecutor. I have worked at the highest levels of the U.S. Department of Justice, where I had the privilege of serving as Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta E. Lynch, and at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, where I spent close to 15 years prosecuting corrupt public officials, dismantling drug cartels, and rooting out all manner of fraud. I am thrilled to now be leading the Inspector General's office. We are independent of the board and of the MTA. My office investigates MTA waste, fraud, abuse, and deficiencies. We recommend remedial actions and monitor their implementation. And when we uncover evidence of criminality, we work closely with law enforcement partners to see that it is investigated and prosecuted where that's appropriate. I can think of no better use for my talents and my experience than at the MTA. The riders and the taxpayers deserve an IG who has a very serious compliance attitude, and the experience, integrity, and the independence to look out for them. I've spent my first month as IG getting to know the MTA leadership, who have very graciously offered their time and support, so thank you for that. And I've been familiarizing myself with the MTA itself. I have visited bus depots, transit facilities, and subway stations in the 5 boroughs, as well as the Long Island Railroad and Metro North facilities in the suburbs. I've inspected operations at these facilities and been hearing directly from workers, supervisors, contractors, and the riders. And I set out to focus on some very basic functions of the MTA. How do things work? How does the MTA do things? How do they clean things? What are the systems that are in place to track employee time and attendance? These are some just very basic things. And so far, what I've seen is both very encouraging in some respects, and in other respects, raises some serious questions in my mind that I will be following up on with my team of career professionals in my office. I've asked for a little assistance operating your, so can you take us to our first slide, please? Thank you. So I decided to look at drains and cleaning of stations and subway cars, and I did that because over a decade ago in 2006, my office did an outstanding report on what caused service outages, which were massive at the time, and what caused flooding after a rainstorm in the fall of 2004. And so what you see up here on the slide is the cover page of that report. And my office's 2006 report found that 2 things contributed to the flood, among other things. One was badly clogged drains that hadn't been regularly cleaned out for years, and also trash, dirt, and litter getting onto the tracks. In that 2006 report, we recommended that the MTA develop systems to regularly inspect, maintain, and clean the drains and the stations. The next slide, please. So to learn more about the drains, I visited the New York City transit employees who were cleaning drains on the number 1 subway tracks near 96th Street on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And that image you see here is of the MTA workers who were cleaning out the drains. It was pretty shocking, actually, to see how badly clogged the drains were and they had gotten. I don't know if the image does it justice, but these drains were literally filled to the brim, overflowing with several feet of mud, litter, and just plain old gunk. And in speaking with the team that was cleaning out the drains that night, they couldn't tell me the last time that the drains had been cleared. So I want to applaud the Subway Action Plan for clearing most of these drains and doing that very important work over the past 2 years. And my hat's off to the workers. That evening, they happened to be MTA workers. They were doing utterly back-breaking work at 1 o'clock in the morning. They had incredible attitudes and real dedication to getting these drains cleaned. But this did leave me with a lot of questions as to what happened during an entire decade after my office issues a rather scathing report and the Subway Action Plan 10 years later getting these drains cleared out, most of it with outside contractors and at great expense. So what happened? Why weren't the IG's recommendations followed? Where were the management systems in place to ensure regular inspections and maintenance? Now, the MTA has pledged to have a real maintenance plan going forward. For that, I am very grateful, and I look forward to reviewing that plan and working with the MTA leadership to ensure that we have very robust systems in place when it comes to drains so that we don't find ourselves back in square one in a few years from now. The next slide, please. Subway station and car cleaning. My team and I visited late night deep cleaning of subway stations that was being done both by outside contractors under the Subway Action Plan as well as by MTA employees. And the images you see on top are deep cleans of subway stations. I visited the Washington Clinton stop on the AC line in Brooklyn. And the photos on the bottom are from my visit to the Jerome Avenue yard in the Bronx, where I saw contractors giving a deep clean. The image on the bottom left is a worker cleaning the inside of the cars, and the image on the bottom right is the deep clean of the outside of the cars. And this, again, was being done pursuant to the subway action plan. Some of the cleaners told me in both scenarios that they didn't think this kind of deep clean had been done for a good many years, and in the case of the deep cleans of the stations, maybe not in decades. One subway car cleaner described to me finding what he described as 5-year-old gum in subway cars, along with syringes, pills, condoms, and other truly disgusting things that no rider should ever have to find in their subway car on a commute. And as my office's 2006 report spelled out, cleaning isn't just a quality of life issue. It is vital for keeping debris and litter from falling onto the tracks, which can cause subway track fires and service delays. So again, I applaud the Subway Action Plan for taking cleaning seriously and doing these deep cleans. It's excellent and very important work. I hope that the MTA adopts and institutionalizes best practices that are learned from these cleanings. A lot of it was accomplished by using outside contractors so that we ensure the same level of cleanliness of both the stations and the cars for years to come. Next slide, please. On time and attendance, I think everybody knows that an effective time and attendance system is essential for ensuring that taxpayer money is protected. And it's also vital for instilling public confidence in the MTA. I visited several facilities. I talked to managers and workers about how they keep track of employee time and attendance. These are photos. On the left is a time clock at the Coney Island rail yard, and the image on the right is of a punch card at the Quill Bus Depot in Manhattan. And what I was surprised to learn was that the MTA uses more than a dozen different time and attendance systems across the agency. And what was troubling to me was the widespread lack of management systems to track employee time and attendance. Some facilities had better systems than others. You can take it to the next slide, please. Can you go? Thank you. For example, at the Metro North Croton Harmon Yard, the clocks at least have a security camera above them. That's the image on the right, so that if one needed to verify an employee's time and attendance, you could, if you had to, at least go to a video to see that the employee was there, although that's not ideal. The image on the left is the Hillside Long Island Railroad facility, where actually they've had a biometric clock. You see there an employee demonstrating for me using his fingerprint to clock in, and they've had that since around 2004 or so. Some places are much better than others, but if you could go back, please. Many facilities are still using these very, very decades-old punch card systems, and you see me demonstrating the punch card, how that's done on the right-hand side. And there is no camera in sight, so there's no means independently of verifying the employee's time and attendance. So I believe that the majority of the MTA employees are incredibly hardworking and honest, and one of the best parts about going out and visiting these facilities has actually been meeting the employees, who are, to a person, so proud, so passionate about their work, and take great pride in working for the MTA. But the times of using these outdated clocks, like the one you see up here now, has to end. I'm very gratified that the MTA is in the process of rolling out biometric clocks to capture employees' time and attendance with their fingerprints. And I look forward to working with the MTA and the board to ensure that these new biometric clocks are installed system-wide in a timely manner. A few other issues before I conclude. If you could go forward, I believe 2 slides. I read the papers every day. There are issues that keep coming up that I believe warrant my office's attention. I've also listened to the comments of the board, not just today, but also at the committee meetings, as well as the comments of the advocates in the public who have spoken before these meetings. And some of those issues clearly warrant my office's attention. When it comes to fare evasion, I look forward to working with the MTA and the board to better track fare evasion and improve preventative measures. Worker safety is also extremely important to me. I personally have been the victim of workplace violence. I know how disturbing it is, not just for the individual employee, but for all of their colleagues and their colleagues at the agency. I've actually had the privilege of speaking with some workers who were assaulted on the job. I am totally amazed at their resiliency in dealing with these crimes committed against them, but they should never be put in that position in the first place. No one should be made to feel unsafe or vulnerable because they work at the MTA, and I look forward to having my office partner with the MTA and our law enforcement colleagues on this issue. My office also has a sophisticated construction investigation team, and they are and will continue to actively look at projects, both large and small, and especially any failings. There are some important projects happening right now, and we will be monitoring them closely. We've all seen the progress over the past 2 years that the Subway Action Plan has brought about in making the system run better. Our challenge is, how do we together learn from past failures and design the best management systems and controls that institutionalize the lessons learned and do it while protecting New Yorkers from fare and tax increases. Most of all, I want to convey my desire to work in partnership with the board whenever possible, and my entire office stands ready to be a part of bringing about positive and lasting change to the MTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that excellent report. The 2006 report of your office before you became the Inspector General, did you say it recommended systemic rules to ensure this didn't happen again, and yet here we are? It's very troubling, and how do you think we can make sure that when these recommendations come out from the IG, that systems are actually put in place?
Yes. One thing that my office has been doing in recent years, and I want to ensure that we continue doing, is following up, whether it's 6 months later or a year later, and checking in to see how they're doing. So that's number one. Number two, I think this board plays a vital role in asking those questions. I want to make sure that my office's reports are available so that you can ask as a board member the right questions. And so we will be looking to upload onto our website the reports that were issued by my office for the past 2 years. I found actually that my office has done some outstanding work. It's not always known by the public, and I think transparency will be helpful.
Vinny.
So welcome and thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the fact that you said a lot of good things about our workforce, which is very comforting. To use some of your own words, the dedication and the back-breaking work that they endure, we appreciate that. With that, just maybe a couple of quick questions. You had mentioned meeting with the agency and dealing with management. I'm wondering what your plans may be to meet with organized labor and labor leaders as we continue to move forward. And I'll give you a two-part question so you can stay on a roll. In regards to the time and attendance thing, which I see that we're actively involved in, has your office also been becoming aware of some of the challenges of some of the craft work and the ability for us to do what we currently do and be productive in the system, and how you'll be continuing to research that and addressing it down the road?
Yes, first of all, as to meetings with labor, I welcome that, and if any board members want to participate or help me facilitate that, I would be happy to work with you on that. In terms of overtime, we understand that overtime can be inevitable in getting the job done. That is not my focus. My office's focus is on waste, fraud, abuse, and making sure there are management systems in place both to prevent fraud and give the public confidence that the overtime is necessary.
just as a follow-up, so as you continue to do that, I would ask that your office look at the challenges for yourselves as to the actual craft work of what a biometric system how it can play out for certain crafts that normally are used to dispatching to locations to get work done, rather than having to find a means to punch in and punch out first, which we're more than happy to do. But please understand as you give recommendations, at least try to identify the additional manpower that you'll need in a lot of the crafts work to encompass that. Just in case you're not getting the feedback from management on that, I would ask, from a labor standpoint, that you look into that.
What I pledge to you is that I will approach this as I did as a prosecutor, not going in with a pre-designed end, but making sure that I gather facts from all sides and all who can give me the information that I need. So I pledge to you that I will do that.
David.
If you go back to 2006, that's 10 years before I came on the board, was there an interaction with the board in terms of informing them of these difficulties? I'm wondering if we should change procedures where perhaps we have to meet with you. I don't know how this works.
Could I jump in for 1 second? I didn't mean to interrupt, Commissioner
Pardon?
Jones. Could I jump in for 1 second?
Oh, sure.
I was just going to jump in and actually remind the board that we as a group have asked for frequent briefings. So in the memo that we put forward just a couple of weeks ago, we asked for a couple of things. First of all, welcome. Glad
Thank
you're
you.
a part of the team. Glad that you're here. We asked for a couple things. One, for IG reports to be shared with the board immediately upon completion. Having dealt with IGs in the past, I was surprised that they're not shared with us upon completion. So we've asked for them to be shared with the board electronically and in hard copy upon completion. We also asked as a board if you could brief us at least quarterly, if not more often. At these board meetings, or even, on occasion, if we have to go into executive session because there's something that you can't talk about publicly, that would be helpful.
I would be delighted to do that.
And we also asked as a board if the IG's office could update the website. When I met with your predecessor, I was surprised that no IG reports have been posted on the website since like 2017. I haven't checked the website lately. I don't know if those have been updated, but the board has just asked in the interest of the public if that could be updated too.
Yes, we are actively working on that, and that'll be accomplished in the near future.
Thanks. Commissioner Jones, I did not mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to remind this board that we had asked for that.
That's exactly what I was trying to figure out, whether we could have confidential briefings where it's appropriate, obviously, in the open meetings law, because I think these would be precisely the things we'd want to track as fiduciaries. And I don't recall having that kind of relationship or briefing in my tenure here since 2016.
No, I welcome the board's involvement in my reports and follow-up, so I totally agree.
Ada. I'm sorry.
I was actually going to ask David the same thing. As I've only been here, it's my second board meeting. How can we as a board help you do your job better? But I'm assuming you're laying that out, and you'll let us know how we can help you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Veronica.
Ms. Picorni, welcome to the role.
Thank you.
You bring excellent, valuable, needed expertise and experience to this office, and I am very thankful for your presentation and the way that you've shared with us how you intend, and your office and your team intend, to apply that experience and expertise to some very pressing issues that we have. You mentioned in your comments that you're independent from the MTA and from the board.
Yes.
Are you also independent from the governor?
Yes. I will tell you, he appointed me, and by statute, I have reporting requirements, including an annual report that we hope to get out very shortly that will reflect the excellent work my office did in 2018. I will be exercising my independence and judgment along with the career professionals in my office as to how that work is carried out.
Anybody else? Larry.
Thank you. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you.
And certainly your presentation is a breath of fresh air. I have a couple questions and a couple thoughts I'd just like to share with you and the other board members. One is with regarding to the clogged drains, going back to the 2006 Inspector General report. One of the things that was identified as part of the subway action plan was standing water was a major cause and problem that resulted in train delays and was a significant impact in on-time performance because of what standing water does to the cars, et cetera, fires and other things. I've been hearing out there since this clogged drain problem was identified, and you've pointed out that it's been at least identified since 2006, that supervisors signed off that the drains were actually cleaned and not clogged. And to the extent that maybe there's still you're still investigating and you're still doing this and it's premature to answer it, in terms of improving management systems and identifying management failures, if this actually occurred where there was a belief that the drains were actually being or pipes cleaned and they were free of debris when actually they weren't ever cleaned and they were totally clogged, that to me is an area of fraud. Somebody made a claim that wasn't accurate, wasn't true. So I'd be curious to know at some point if that actually existed and how systemic it was. I also think that would be helpful in terms of getting recommendations from your office. You know, one of the things about the Subway Action Plan is that there was a balance between the using of independent contractors on a number of tasks in the plan versus MTA employees. There were a lot of power issues where we used Con Edison on, I don't know if you want to call them an independent contractor, but they weren't the MTA. We use independent contractors for drain cleaning. We use independent contractors for station cleaning, et cetera. And as we need to move forward to phase 2, 3, 4, we need to figure out what the right balance and cost is on how to prevent drains from being clogged ever again, stations kept clean to the higher standard, cars cleaned, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to figure out what the balance is between using independent contractors and using MTA workers, as well as the budgetary impacts. So the other thing in terms of your investigation on overtime, I would just ask you on, going forward as you continue your investigation, to be able to make sure that as we're now moving forward with installing a state-of-the-art biometric system at every location. Obviously, it was disturbing that for many years that we didn't have state-of-the-art systems and that we had 20 different systems or more at most of the locations. I just want to make sure that in putting in the biometric system everywhere, that we're comfortable with redundancy and whether or not there needs to be or not needs to be video cameras, that all these issues are being resolved so that we come up with a solution and we don't have to constantly look at it. And the other thing, just two things I'd like you to think about. One is, obviously I know that your primary mission is fraud, waste, and abuse. I am always concerned about cybersecurity. I worry about how strong our systems are, that nobody can hack into them and cause major disruption, shutting down the system. There may be very good systems in place, and we may have that, but I don't know that. So it's privacy issues. It runs the gamut, right? From the worst case scenario of shutting down trains to stealing people's personal information. I just want to make sure that I have no idea if there's been past IG reports that have raised issues, identified things, and as some people said, we're concerned that your recommendations and even past recommendations that are relevant even in today, that they get implemented and run the. And the last thing I just want to throw out there is you're an investigatory agency, but one of the things I'd ask you and your office to consider is to also be a training agency. When I was Secretary to the Governor, one of the things I spent time on talking to the state IG, and I actually worked with Linda on this a little bit as well in my prior life, was obviously the Inspector General's office, they're experts in fraud, waste, and abuse. So using that expertise to train our management, our leadership, on how to prevent and avoid fraud, waste, and abuse. Well, I'm not looking to put you out of business, though it might be a nice thing, but it would certainly maybe reduce your workload if the proper people get trained on how to put in the proper internal controls or risk managers, and making sure that, you know, audits are done on an annual basis and those audit findings are implemented. So I would just ask that you consider being a proactive training tool as well as someone that's looking at potential problems that exist or ongoing at the agency. But I appreciate you getting back to us to understand whether or not there were claims made about clogged pipes and people believed that their pipes were being cleaned and when they weren't, as well as figuring out how we balance the roles of independent contractors and MTA workers on certain tasks going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, too. I applaud your thoroughness and your precision, your approach with the job, and hopefully, you know, you continue down this road. And my ideal vision is that, you know, by you doing your job as precisely and as thoroughly as you can, and communicating with the board, you will increase the level of trust between the parties. And because there's no timekeeping system, you can use sundials to keep time if you have people you trust. There's no system that will replace being employed by and employing people you trust. And I think that's what we want, the direction we want to move. And you know, I think what Larry said is entirely correct. My more concern about, you know, that probably there were people that signed off on that, but who checked on the people that were supposed to be checking on those drains too? Did you have a system in place where you had a quality control level where you'd say 5% of the, you know, we run over 5% of the supervisors to see if they did their jobs too? And I don't, you know, there has to be layers of authority here to make it work. But in that regard, and I do think Larry properly characterizes that as some sort of fraud. But now there's one thing that's happened recently that I'm just curious whether you've investigated or not. It was not my issue. It was the issue for Brother Samuelson of the Transit Workers Union regarding the 38th Street yard and the allegations that had been a sabotage time clock. And according to him, that had, you know, that was entirely incorrect, and that the time clock had not been sabotaged, that it entirely had been functioning all along. And I just wondered if you have investigated that particular circumstance yet, that particular instance yet?
So you're talking about the timekeeping clock at the 38th Street yard in Brooklyn. It was reported on June 8th or thereabouts of 2019 that the clock had the sort of face of it smashed in, seemingly. The police and investigators from my office did investigate. They did respond to the scene. I spoke to the manager of the facility that day. I'm not sure where you're getting your information from. If somebody wants to come forward and provide it to my office, they can do so even anonymously if they like, if they have more information about it. But they were able to narrow down the time frame of when that clock was apparently sabotaged to a few-hour time frame on June 7th, because workers who my investigators interviewed and the police interviewed saw the clock fine. Face was perfectly intact, and then a few hours later it was seen smashed.
Well, factually, I mean, we agree. I mean, the information I got was, yeah, there was a crack in the face of the time clock. However, that the time clock was functioning the entire time. Was that your?
Oh, I believe it was still functional. My investigators, who are mostly former NYPD detectives, so my investigators who went out there said their sort of educated assumption was that it looked like maybe someone had elbowed it and smashed the front face of it. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, yeah, my bigger concern is that you really haven't, in my mind, precluded that it could have been entirely an accident, entirely unrelated to sabotage. So my concern is that it be characterized as sabotage, particularly in the press, particularly at a time when we're having, as you documented, and I expect you to address as well, the severe increase on assaults on transit workers, and that this paints a picture of, which I understand people don't trust us. Like I said, my point is that we get back to a point of trust, and none of us countenance sabotage in any way. But I do think that as far as fraud goes, to characterize something as sabotage that you do not know is sabotage is sort of throwing gasoline on a fire. And I don't know that that's fraud by Larry's designation of fraud, but it certainly leads me down the road of distrust, so which takes us further away from where we want to be.
It was, I fairly characterized it as an apparent act of sabotage. My investigators who went out there had a collection of over 50 years of law enforcement expertise, trained investigators. In their view, it looked like somebody had elbowed it. And if it was broken by accident, I question why whoever broke it wouldn't have come forward. So I think that was a fair characterization. And one reason to get the word out is prophylactic. We don't want to have these any acts of sabotage. And it's helpful to get the word out, A, to ask for witnesses to come forward, and B, we want to get the word out that it's not acceptable to do that. And so that can also be helpful. And I'm sure we all know instances of the police going forward and asking that certain behavior be discontinued. So that's a legitimate law enforcement technique. Again, my quarrel's not with the workers, who I have thoroughly enjoyed meeting, and I hope that is the takeaway that you get from this meeting. I think they are honest. I think they work very hard and take great pride in their work.
No, that's definitely my takeaway from the meeting. I only wish you'd have brought in like a gallon of that gunk so people could have got a smell of it too, so you would have understood, people would have understood. I'm sure it was quite oleferous down there. But so I agree with you. Incompetent sabotage is still sabotage. But the clock continued to work was all our point.
Yes. And these drains getting cleaned, that is not the fault of the workers. The workers were perfectly happy to go out there and do this incredibly hard work in the middle of the night. My question is, where were the management systems directing them to do that all of these years?
Robert and Linda.
First, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for accepting this role. It's going to be a big job, but to have you someone with your qualifications and your credibility there is a testament to you. What I want to go back is the 2006 report is somewhat devastating in that if it had been followed up on, if they had been, we wouldn't have many of the problems that we've had over the last few years, which goes to the point of, and you mentioned this, but I just wanted to make sure we're looking at this going backwards as well, in addition to going forward. Recommendations that were in that report were probably not followed through on, and or there was fraud, so the management controls and systems in place were inadequate. So if you're going back as far as 2006, if you could make sure you're looking at other audits and reports that were issued by your office and seeing, have the systems been put in place, have the recommendations been put in place?
Yes.
My sense is that probably they haven't been. The recommendations have been made. They haven't been followed through on. They haven't been acted on. They fall by the wayside. So doing an audit report and having no follow through does nothing to change the environment. So if you can just make sure you're going back, looking at those and renew those recommendations, follow up and make sure that the controls and the systems are in place and bring them to the board's attention so that we can make sure that they're acted on.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Carolyn, I know we're all piling more work on your plate, and you should probably ask for a budget increase. But I just wanted to also comment that if supervisors were across the board verifying that work was getting done, whether it's time and attendance or cleaning or whatever it might be, across the board, if that should turn out to be the case, that would be very troubling, because that would mean there are issues with the culture of compliance. And my point there would just be to say, and you know this from your experience, that it would be very important to address that for the benefit not just of the public and the ridership, but for the employees, who should not have to feel that they have to go along and that they can't say this isn't right. So to help address that, I think, is also critically important as well. How does that get communicated within the agency so that workers feel that they can do their job without feeling like they're going to stand out and there's going to be some kind of repercussion if they don't go along?
Anybody else? Rhonda, please.
Welcome. And
Thank you.
your presentation was excellent, and I was very happy to see that you looked at something that addresses quality of life issues for the riding public, which is the cleanliness of stations and cars, something that they see every day when they utilize the system. And if we did a better job of that, we would have happier riders and more satisfied riders amongst our other issues, but quality of life issues are very important.
Thank you.
Carolyn, I think the consensus of the board is obviously commending the work you've done. The one comment I would make is if at any point you're not getting cooperation from anybody in the organization, I trust you'll let the board know, and we'll ensure that you get the cooperation you need.
Thank you. You and the presidents have all done that, and I'm very grateful.
Good. Thank you, Neil. Start over. I'm now going to ask a motion to convene an executive session to discuss two matters. First, a matter regarding collective bargaining pursuant to Section 105(1)(e) of the New York State Public Officers Law. And second, matters relating to a current or future investigation pursuant to Section 105(1)(c) of the New York State Public Officers Law. Before I ask for a motion in a second, I want to make the following point, that we are going to vary, if Ms. Faust is still in the House, we're going to vary our past practice with respect to the collective bargaining matter, which is we're going to come back into public session and vote on that matter in public, although it will be discussed in private. Are there any comments before we have Mr. Tessitore?
Yes. So, I met 3 new board members this morning, and I'm still trying to meet and get to know some newer board members. But before you break into executive session, I was hoping that I have the opportunity to speak to the board as a whole, because we won't be joining you. The last month's meeting was not an ideal meeting, but a lot of things were said that needed to be said. I'm personally not going to continue to try to navigate my way into an executive session to make an argument for labor if there is not a place and the rules do not allow for labor representatives to be in these executive sessions, I will have to accept that. But with that said, before the board convenes, I would just at least like to make 2 points. The first point is the MTA workforce throughout our entire system and all agencies is working harder today than it ever has before. I've been here long enough to know that our employees, system-wide in all the agencies, are working longer hours and working harder because we're doing historic work. We're rebuilding a subway system, we're rebuilding and expanding on railroads. A lot is getting done. With that said, when you meet and you discuss things relative to investigations, to waste and fraud, it still is weighing on our employees. They're not forgetting what they've been reading about and what they've been seeing. And while I have trust in new leadership at the IG, we have decided to go a route to include more people and put more resources towards more investigations so everybody can kind of coordinate together. I implore this board to be mindful that our workforce sees this and they're not comfortable with it and they're concerned about it. They have nothing to hide from and they have nothing to be afraid of because they work hard. But we all know, sooner or later, when you throw the hook in the water, you're going to come up with something, right? And that may be the case. But as I've heard numerous times, the large majority of our workforce is doing the right thing. I've heard it from everybody on the board. So while you make decisions to continue to go a path to put more and more resources into investigating things that may or may not need to, please be mindful of the workforce the way you give them accolades when they do the right thing.
Vinny, I would make the point that not only board members, but the Inspector General in her comments today spoke about the quality and the dedication of the workforce, and I hope you would take that back to your folks at the Long Island Railroad. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I got a couple points to make, and I guess there'll be legal points, and the 24 lawyers that are in the room will probably wonder, what is this machinist telling lawyers about legal points? And if you don't like my legal advice, stick around for my medical advice. I'll be doing an examination after the meeting. But there's two points I want to make. First of all, that the open meetings law, particularly specifically, relieves collective bargaining issues from its coverage. And there's 50 years of history of dealing with this in executive session. That you want to bring it out into the public, I understand, and if there's maybe a reason for it, and I'm certainly not going to be the one that sues you if you're going to get sued for violating the open meetings law, which is very onerous in many aspects of how the agencies run. However, my position is that collective bargaining issues have been exempted by the open meetings law. Now, the other issue goes to more of the issues of trust I repetitively try to get to on this board. And it also has to do with the concepts of duty of fair representation, which again is a legal concept I'm a little more familiar with because, in my former life as a business representative, I was often accused of not fairly representing people when I did not want to progress their grievances that I did not think had merit. And in cases of people where they'd done serious things, waste, fraud, and abuse things, I had a good luck in your next career rule where I would not depend on an arbitrator to make those judgments for me. I would just let the guy go, and I would in these cases. But my point is that our responsibility for duty of fair representation, and neither Vinny nor myself nor John are under those compunctions on this board. We have fiduciary responsibilities to this board just like everybody else does, and our duty of fair representation is limited to our members, and even then it's limited to assuring they get a fair and impartial investigation. But guilt and innocence is not our thing, but assuring that it's a fair and impartial investigation. And I have no reason to believe that both Ms. Picorni and the other prosecutor lady, that they're going to be pursuing things in a less than fair and impartial way. I have no reason to believe that. But by the same token, you have no reason to believe that I would do any fraud on my part either, and that my duty of fair representation in no way conflicts with my fiduciary duty. And that's my position. If you want to exclude me from the meeting, that's, I got other things to do anyway. So that's fair, I guess, but you're missing an opportunity. What am I going to say? Are you afraid of something I'm going to say is really more the issue than something I'm going to hear.
So, Mr. Brown, first, you're a very skilled lawyer. I look forward to your medical advice later. I'll make the following point. When the board, pursuant to law, met in executive session on my salary, which was required by law. I didn't go into the executive session because I thought it was a conflict, actual or potential. I think the same thing is true here. I think this is a application of this law. It does not speak to Mr. Tessitore or your integrity or honesty. I think we both find you valuable colleagues who speak your mind and add tremendous value. But that's the approach we're going to take. Mr. Lynn.
Yes, thank you. In the 48 hours I've now been a member of the board, this has been an extraordinary experience. I want to express for those who don't know me that I spent the last 5 years doing collective bargaining in the de Blasio administration. And the approach that we took there was one absolutely of respect for the workforce, understanding of the workforce, conversation with the workforce. We took a situation where 144 bargaining units were unsettled, many for 4 years, 5 years. Half the workforce had received increases, the other half hadn't received increases, and there was no trust whatsoever between labor and management. And I spent 5 years solving all of those contracts and, in fact, reaching another round of collective bargaining. That was exactly why I thought it was so exciting to come to this situation and be a member of this board and try to bring to this board that experience on how to deal with labor effectively and collaboratively. As looking at the audit reports from this morning, 2/3 of our budget are on personnel costs. Everyone acknowledges that without a workforce and management paddling in the same direction, we will never achieve the type of objectives that we've set for ourselves. So I think that we need to focus seriously on labor. I understand in my professional career how when things go to litigation and enforcement and inspector general, there's generally a reaction of labor of you're disrespecting me in that process. And somehow we need to find an approach that says, no, there is no disrespect. That probably the most important thing, I've had many business managers say to me, your job at management is to root out fraud and corruption. If you've got a lousy employee, get rid of that employee. They're not going to sustain that. And as you said, Commissioner Brown, that you wouldn't even support representation of someone who is clearly doing inappropriate stuff. We all have a public interest as public employees for much of my career, that the public understand that corruption will be rooted out. But consistently with that, that is not the major part of what management is all about and operation of railroads are all about. It is working with the workforce and solving problems and listening to the workforce. And my sense also is you learn so much when you hear from labor. And going and speaking to labor leaders and going and speaking at meetings of labor is so critically important because you hear so much. I generally have the sense that where there's smoke, there's fire. When people are yelling and screaming about a problem with management, there's generally wisdom and validity in what they say. Not necessarily people get to the right conclusion, and it may need some time and effort to figure out what is the solution to the problem, but the issues brought to the table are invariably important to consider. So I hope we as a board can reach an approach of how we best work with labor, how we work collaboratively with labor, how we get to the same endpoint. Because I think we all are wanting to get to the same endpoint, which is producing a service that the public views as reliable, views as critical to their life, and we want to provide that service, and the question is how we do it together. So I look forward to working with you and figuring out solutions to these problems in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Pat, if your request to go into executive session was a motion, I second it.
Okay, great. Can I have a motion to go back into public session? Second, all in favor? Good, terrific. While in executive session, the board discussed the collective bargaining agreement between MTA Bridges and Tunnels and the Bridge and Tunnel Officers Benevolent Association, representing approximately 412 bridge and tunnel officers. Can I have a motion to approve the collective bargaining agreement amendment? Second, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstained? Thank you. I'd also now like a motion to adjourn the meeting. I move it. Second, all in favor? Thank you. Our next board meeting is Wednesday, July 24th. Thank you all for coming. So we're going to start off with a report on World Pride Service, and I'm going to give the podium to Andy Byford for a minute or two.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, at the MTA, we're very excited about Pride coming to town, World Pride coming to town. I happen to live in Sydney when World Pride came to Sydney, so I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fantastic. And as the Chairman mentioned today, we have updated our plan. So I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of what we will be doing. The big change is that as a result of updated numbers, customer numbers that we've got from the city, the projected attendance has been increased. And as a result of the fact that we received the good news earlier in the week that the L project is well ahead of schedule, that does mean that we've taken the customer friendly decision to run the L service, train service, the L service, normal weekend service throughout the weekend. So it will be operating on 4-minute headways. That is in addition to other changes. For example, we'll be running the number 1 train every 6 minutes instead of every 8. The C every 8 minutes instead of every 10. We will be running the G at 10 minutes intervals all throughout the weekend. The M line will run every 10 minutes from Metropolitan Avenue to Delaney, Essex. So we're really pushing the boat out on this. We want to do our bit and we want to put on a really good Pride service. On the buses, we will be making sure with police that we can get our buses through crowded streets. We're paying particular attention to 14th Street. There will be a detour via Houston, but we're working with NYPD and with our colleagues at DOT to keep the buses moving. Our message to customers is please use transit. It's the best way to go. We have taken that decision to keep the L line running. We want to do our bit. We want to put on a good show for the people of New York and as the Pride participants come to town. So we're ready. We have lots of additional customer service staff. We've got contingency plans well in place, and we're ready to put on a really good show and do our bit for World Pride.
Good. And the L train, obviously, increase in service made possible by the work of Jan Lieber and his team on the L train, which is going well and a month ahead of schedule. Questions? Greg.
Good evening. Good afternoon, Chairman.
Seems like evening.
Yeah, it does, although it's been longer sometime. The MTA already has a fairly lengthy code of conduct. This is regarding the resolution. What do you think that the legislature could do to actually kind of impact behavior? And isn't that something that could be addressed with more enforcement?
Well, look, I think the answer is the legislature would have to act for us to put this into effect. I think it's encouraging that the state Senate passed the bill. It was different in some, Senator Savino sponsored it. It was different in some respects than the resolution that Commissioner Feinberg described today. But I think ultimately this is a matter for the legislature to legislate on. I think these are serious issues. I think we're talking about a relatively small handful of offenders who have been repeat serial offenders. Crime in the subways is down. The subways are safe. But given the media descriptions of some of the conduct that women and children and others have had to undergo, we thought it was appropriate that we act. And we'll be discussing this with the governor's office. The governor, obviously, on Monday or Tuesday of this week, issued a strong statement of support. And we'll be talking with legislative leaders and elected officials in the months to come. Legislature, obviously, out of session until January.
And Pat, is the legislation that Senator Savino put forward, do you support that? Does the MTA support that language verbatim, or would you like to see it changed at all?
No, I think that I think Commissioner Feinberg's first hats off to Senator Savino for advancing that and getting it passed in the state Senate. I think that Commissioner Feinberg's language and resolution is a broader, B, more likely in my mind to withstand legal and constitutional attack, and C is Commissioner Feinberg's approach, I think it's fair to say, is very customer focused, which is what this is all about. So I commend the work of Senator Savino and I commend the work of my colleague Sarah Feinberg. Then
I got more questions.
please,
Sorry, no problem. On Monday, Commissioner Feinberg also said that she'd like fare beaters to be publicly shamed and embarrassed by photos and video of people fare beating. Is that an idea that you support? And for Andy, I'm wondering if that's something that was done in any of the past transit systems he worked in.
I'll defer to Andy on the second question. I'm not into public shaming personally. I think that fare evasion is a serious matter. I think that the announcement that the governor and DA Vance and I participated in last week is a serious, comprehensive, and what I believe will be effective approach to fare evasion, focused on deterrence and not arrest. And I'll ask Andy to address the international situation.
Yeah, sure. It certainly wasn't done in Toronto. That wasn't a practice in Toronto. And I'm trying to think back to my time in Sydney and in London. I don't recall that as a specific technique. I mean, obviously, if someone was wanted for some heinous crime, then sometimes the resident police force would put up posters asking for public's assistance. I don't recall that specifically, but like the chairman, what we want to stress today is this is about deterrence, both by having the signage we've got up there, the various other mitigations we're taking on the subway and the buses, but also by having police officers working with transit staff and the Eagle teams. It's not about arresting people, it's about providing a deterrence to get people to do the right thing.
One more follow-up. The MTA has put out video of fare beaters in the past, which seems like a form of public shaming or at least warning. No,
I wouldn't describe it as that. I would say that it's a mechanism whereby you're putting up evidence to help the police identify someone. So that's the advantage of having CCTV. It's not really a shaming mechanism. It's helping police identify who we need to hold to account.
But the video that was on Gothamist, that was an Inside Edition, like the videos that were posted in the meeting.
What that was really aimed to do, that was to demonstrate, to illustrate rather, a widespread problem that is literally widespread across the city and across different demographics. That's what that was aimed to do.
Got it. Thank you both.
Finn.
Hey, good afternoon. So, Chairman, I want to see if you could elaborate as to whether or not you think Robert Mujica, his appointment is a direct conflict of interest considering his role as the budget director. And I have a second kind of related question that we can get to after that.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's a conflict of interest. I've worked in a prior lives, I guess, with both Linda Lacewell and Robert Mujica. Having the budget director of the state of New York on the MTA board, to me, and I hold Robert in high regard. I think he's a unbelievably smart, sophisticated financial person, government, and a person of integrity. I welcome him to the board, as do I do the same with respect to Linda Lacewell. I think having people like Robert, Linda, Polly Trottenberg, and others with government experience is incredibly helpful. I don't see the conflict of interest.
Okay, so the second part of the question is, there are a lot of concerns with the idea that was brought up in the board Monday and today about reevaluating capital plan projects that have not yet started or not yet funded. Some see that as a way to kind of get the state off the hook for its commitment to the MTA.
So I don't. I think Larry Schwartz is asking reasonable and appropriate diligence questions. Why is the project late? What can we do about it, right? I'll just note, one example, right? In the CPOC meeting on Monday, there was discussion about the bus command center and the fact that it had been held up by FAA monopole, toll pole in the flight area of JFK. I think we could have done better on that. I think that having nearer term visibility into those things, so I think Larry's questions are entirely appropriate diligence questions. I don't see us moving projects from 2015, 2019 into the future capital plan, although at some point if a project's in the capital plan and it hasn't advanced and it's a meritorious project and maybe you move it into the capital plan, maybe the capital plan ought to be longer, which would require state legislation. There was discussion today that some agencies, the Port Authority wasn't mentioned, the Port Authority does a 10-year capital plan, so I think that's a subject of worthy discussion. If you were going to move the project, obviously you'd move the capital, but I don't think that's what Larry was suggesting. I think we ought to have a better sense, why are projects late, and why hasn't this project started? In some cases, there may be really good reasons for it, right? It may be that you're doing two projects on two subway lines that are adjacent, and the customer disruption would be too great. And there may be cases where MTA management fell down on the job, didn't get it done effectively. I think it's very case by case and very factual.
And do you have a sense of how much money that of the MTA's own resources you guys have before you'd have to dip into the state funding that was committed?
Well, as we discussed today, and that's why I asked Bob Foran, the CFO, to weigh in, we're beginning to access an additional $3 billion of the state's $7.3 billion commitment. So it's, I think, an additional sign the money's available. It's been authorized. The deal all along was that state and city funding would come at the end, would be the last dollars in. That's the deal, and that's the way that this is unwinding. Emma.
Hello. So the reorganization is due at the end of this week. Can you tell us a little bit about the process here? Is it something the board's going to be briefed on next month? Do they have to vote on it? What is the goal here, and when will the public learn more about it?
The board will be briefed in July. There will be a board vote on it. It will be a draft report. I think it's an important deadline, an important work product. Obviously, the timing was set by the legislature in the in the legislative session that just ended, and we don't get to negotiate or change the timeline. But yes, the board will be briefed in July, and the public will be made aware. A number of, as I'm sure you know, advocacy and good government groups, and at least one labor leader was invited to ask to meet rather with the Alex Partners team. And that included, many of the advocates who attend and speak at our meetings regularly, and that was something that I recommended and advocated for, and hopefully their input was helpful.
And would it be something as big as like merging Metro North and Long Island Railroad? Could they request that? Or one rumor out there is that the Transit Museum would be peeled off and no longer be part of the MTA. What type of stuff is in this world of reorganization?
Well, the Transit Museum is not part of the MTA. It's a separate not-for-profit organization that does great work. Other than that, Emma, I'm not going to respond to specific questions. In doing that, you shouldn't assume that I'm expressing a view with respect to the Metro North and Long Island Railroad consolidation one way or the other. I just think it would be inappropriate at this point, prior to the board having been briefed and with a Alex Partners plan, report rather, that is still very much a draft. Paul.
Hi, Pat. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
The MTA is in the midst of this enormous overhaul that hopefully will lead to a much leaner and more responsive and efficient organization. And it feels like there are things going on across the board, even when it comes to cracking down on fare evasion, making sure that contractors and consultants are giving value for money and meeting targets and goals. It feels to me as though one of the only areas where there seems to be no movement is on the FOIL process here, where I and my colleagues, we submit requests for information and they fall into a black hole. Oftentimes we don't even get a response that anything is being dealt with. I've had conversations with paralegals where they basically say, we're understaffed, we'll get to you as soon as we can, which, as far as I'm concerned, probably isn't legal because there is a mandate. They're supposed to be responding in good time. I noticed that at this meeting today, one of the board members said government works for the people, and another board member said transparency is really important. And so I just wondered, what, if anything, have you done, are you doing, or will you do to improve transparency at the MTA?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. First, that was a very crafty way to get to the FOIL question. I thought that was a very clever introduction. Look, I'm not proud of the FOIL process. I think Reinvent Albany said that while I was at the Port Authority, we increased transparency, including on the FOIL process. We've got to fix it. It's broken. There's no question. And not happy with it, and we're going to fix it. I'll also note, and I don't want to overstate this, I think Reinvent Albany said we've also here at the MTA have taken steps towards, for instance, open data, open budget. Some material will go up on the website, and I'll ask Max to kind of confirm the timing of this to you. The FOIL process needs to be fixed, and it's clearly broken. I'm not going to defend it.
And do you have a timeline for that?
Paul, let us come back to you on that. I can tell you it's in terms of the world of transparency, it's a high level priority because it's not working right now.
Okay, thank you.
Dana.
Hi. So today the new MTA Inspector General acknowledged that 38th Street rail yard time clock sabotage that was purportedly sabotaged was still functional. Do you think it's appropriate or makes sense for the IG to cry sabotage via her Twitter feed and press release in circumstances like that, or is
Well, look,
or is that hyperbolic?
So I, for the most part, don't read Twitter. I believe what she said today. I've got enough ways to waste my time. I don't. I believe what she said today was apparent act of sabotage. And again, you'll have to check with her. I hold her in high regard. I think that she's a unbelievably experienced federal prosecutor. I'm not going to give her advice. I mean, she was Deputy Chief of Staff to the Attorney General of the United States of America and a serious prosecutor here in the federal, in New York, I guess Eastern District and Southern District, and she doesn't need my advice on how to conduct her office.
Do you think it was sabotage?
I don't have a view. I'm not in the business of doing criminal or civil investigations. I don't have a view. Alfonso.
Hello. A couple questions about overtime. First, could you give us any update on where you are in hiring a consultant or an investigator to review overtime fraud internally?
Yeah, so Alfonso, one of Alex Partner's partner has been charged. He's an expert on time and attendance matters, and he's been charged with overseeing the implementation and developing business rules for how the biometric clocks ought to be deployed. I'll note that as you leave the 20th floor here today, a biometric clock's been installed here on this floor. I don't know when it'll be put into use, but I expect that'll be in the weeks ahead. And they've been deployed, I can't say on every floor at 2 Broadway, but I believe most of them. But Alex Partners, part of their charge is to look at the time and attendance issues. The Alex Partners partner who's dealing with it is a time and attendance expert and lots of experience with Chronos and lots of experience with biometric clocks.
So you're no longer going forward with the reported hiring of Carrie Cohen, the former prosecutor?
Carrie Cohen, we have retained for a 60-day period as well.
Can I ask what the terms of her contract are?
In terms of
how much she's going to get paid for that?
I'll come back to you. I don't have that. Max will get that number to you.
Okay. Secondly, I wanted to get to your reaction to this dust-up yesterday with LIR President Eng offering a financial incentive to some of its workers to not take time off during the day to go vote?
No, that's not what happened. The new law got passed in April. It expands the time during one shift for, as I understand it, both, I'm not an expert on the law, but both public and private employees. First time it's been used. There was a countywide election in Queens last night. There were elections in Nassau and Suffolk, which is where the bulk of the employees of the Long Island Railroad came. Phil thought the appropriate, first of all, the elections, polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., a 15-hour timeline. The right of franchise, the right to vote, is an incredibly important part of being an American and an incredibly important part of our democracy. And I think Phil was focused on allowing workers, every one of them, to, if they had the opportunity to vote, not everybody did, right? It depended on whether there was a primary in your area. A, to be able to vote. B, to make customer service yesterday, or Tuesday rather, that was done effectively. I think the decision that Phil and the management team made was appropriate.
Was it your sense that some Long Island Railroad workers were taking advantage of this law, whether they really intended to use
No,
the time to vote or not?
I have no belief that any Long Island Railroad worker took advantage. I don't think that's the case. And I will say the fact that we made service on the Long Island Railroad, Metro North and New York City Transit on Election Day or primary day with the new law, I think is a testimony to the dedication of the workforce at every agency, including in this case Long Island Railroad. So I don't think that for a second.
Thank you.
Please. You're good. Okay. Aaron? Dan?
Hey. Have you read the Alex Partners report?
I've read drafts of it, yeah.
And
it's compelling reading.
What about it is compelling? You don't have to get into specifics. I don't want to waste a question on specifics.
Dan, I don't intend to.
What's your read of it?
Look, I think great beach reading. I think no. Look, it's an incredibly important report. It's in draft. I'm going to give you the same answer that I gave Emma, which I'm not going to discuss the content or the substance of it. But I think it's an incredibly important part, and I think the legislature and the governor were wise in requiring that a third-party firm be hired. I think Alex Partners is a world-class firm, and beyond that, I don't have any questions or comments.
Short question. What is the cost of the L train project?
Jeno? $477 is the contract price. The price will be lower than that. It's as specific as I can be. Anybody else? All right, good. Thank you all.